The despair of the old. The wrinkled old woman was filled with joy to see the beautiful creature celebrated by all, who all wanted to please, that beautiful being as fragile as her, old lady, and like her also without teeth or hair. And he approached him to make parties and pleasant gestures. But the frightened child struggled as the poor decrepit woman caressed him, filling the house with her howls. Then the old lady withdrew to her eternal solitude, crying in a corner, saying, "Oh! The time of pleasing even the innocent has passed for us, old, unfortunate females, and we even horrify small children when we go to give them affection." The sinful self of the artist. How penetrating is the end of the day in autumn! Oh! Piercing to pain. For there are certain delicious sensations in it, no less intense for being vague, and there is no sharper point than that of the infinite. What a great delight to drown your gaze in the immensity of the sky and the sea! Solitude, silence, incomparable chastity of the cerulean. A small sail, trembling on the horizon, an imitator, in its smallness and isolation, of my irremediable existence, monotonous melody of the tidal wave, all that thinks for me, or I for it, since in the greatness of the digression the self soon it is lost. Think, I say, but musically and picturesquely, without tricks, without syllogisms, without deductions. Such thoughts, however, whether they come from me or arise from things, soon become too intense. The energy and pleasure creates discomfort and positive suffering. My nerves, very strained, only give out shrill, painful vibrations. And now the depth of the sky appalls me, its limpidity exasperates me. The insensitivity of the sea, the immutability of the spectacle revolts me. Oh! Is it strength to suffer eternally, or to flee from beauty eternally? Charming nature, ruthless, ever victorious rival, leave me. Do not tempt my desires and my pride any more. The study of beauty is a duel in which the artist screams in terror before falling defeated. A funny. It was the explosion of the new year, chaos of mud and snow, traversed by 1,000 carriages, sparkling with toys and chocolates, swarming with greed and despair, official rave of a big city, made to disturb the brain of the strongest loner. Amidst all that hubbub and noise trotted a donkey briskly, driven by a lout who wielded a whip. When the donkey was about to turn the corner of a sidewalk, a gentleman in gloves, patent leather, cruelly tied up and imprisoned in a new suit, bowed, ceremoniously, before the humble animal, and said to him, taking off his hat, "I wish you good and happy." Then he turned with a fatuous air to I don't know what comrades of his, as if to beg them to add approval to his contentment. The donkey, without seeing the joker, continued to run with zeal to where duty called. I was suddenly seized by an immeasurable rage against that magnificent imbecile, who seemed to me to concentrate in himself all the ingenuity of France. The double room. A room that looks like a fantasy, a truly spiritual room, whose stagnant atmosphere is lightly colored in pink and blue. There the soul takes a bath of laziness, scented by sorrow and desire. It is something crepuscular, bluish and pinkish, a dream of voluptuousness during an eclipse. The furniture has elongated, dejected, languid forms. The furniture seems to dream. It would be said that they are endowed with a sleepwalking life like the vegetable and the mineral. The fabrics speak a mute language, like the flowers, like the skies, like the declining suns. On the walls, no artistic abomination. In relation to the pure dream, to the unanalyzed impression, the definite art, the positive art is blasphemy. Everything here has enough clarity and the delicious darkness of harmony. An infinitesimal fragrance, exquisitely chosen, mixed with the slightest humidity, navigates in this atmosphere, where the sleepy spirit is lulled by greenhouse sensations. Abundant, the muslin reigns in front of the windows and before the bed, spreads out in cascades of snow. On the bed lies the idol, the queen of dreams. But how is it here? Who brought her? What magical power installed her on this throne of dreams and voluptuousness? Does matters? Here it is. I recognize her. Hear those eyes whose flame pierces the twilight, those subtle and terrible eyes that I recognize for their terrifying malice. They attract, subjugate, devour the gaze of the imprudent who contemplates them. I often study those black stars, which demand curiosity and admiration. To what benevolent demon do I owe finding myself like this, surrounded by mystery, silence, peace and perfumes? Oh beatitude! What we are used to calling life, even in its happiest expansion, has nothing in common with this supreme life that I now know and that I savor minute by minute, second by second. Not. There are no more minutes or seconds. Time has disappeared, eternity reigns, an eternity of delights. But a terrible, heavy knock resounds at the door and, as in hellish dreams, I think I've received a hoe blow to the stomach. And then a ghost enters. He is a bailiff who has come to torture me in the name of the law. She is a concubine who comes to proclaim her misery and add the trivialities of her life to the pains of mine, or the messenger of a newspaper editor who demands the continuation of the manuscript. The paradisiacal room, the idol, the sovereign of dreams, the sylph, as the great René used to say, all that magic has disappeared with the brutal blow of the spectrum. Horror! I remember. I remember. Yes. That hovel, that abode of eternal boredom is just mine. Behold the stupid, dusty, rickety furniture, the fireplace without flame or embers, infamous with spittle, the sad windows where the rain has carved furrows in the dust, handwritten, crossed out or incomplete, the almanac where the pencil marked the sinister dates. And that perfume from another world, with which I was intoxicated with perfected sensitivity, has been, alas, replaced by a fetid smell of tobacco mixed with I don't know what nauseating mold. The staleness of desolation is breathed here now. In this narrow world, but so overflowing with disgust, only one familiar object smiles at me, the vial of laudanum, an old and terrible friend who, like all friends, alas, is fertile in tricks and betrayals. Oh yeah. Time has reappeared, time now reigns sovereign, and with the horrible old man his demonic procession of memories, sorrows, spasms, fears, anguish, nightmares, anger and neuroses has returned. I assure you that now the seconds are strongly and solemnly accentuated, and each one, as it emerges from the pendulum, says, I am life, the unbearable, the implacable life. There is no more than a second in human life whose mission is to announce good news, the good news that instills an inexplicable fear in everyone. Yes. Queen of Time. It has resumed its brutal dictatorship. And he urges me on, as if I were an ox, with his double sting, get up, then, donkey. Sweat, slave. Live, then, cursed man. Each one with his chimera. Under a wide grey sky, on a vast dusty plain, without paths, without grass, without a thistle, without a nettle, I met many men who walked bent over. Each one carried, on his back, an enormous chimera, as heavy as a sack of flour or coal, or the knapsack of a Roman infantryman. But the monstrous animal was not an inert weight, on the contrary, It enveloped and oppressed the man, with its elastic and powerful muscles. It clasped its two vast claws to the chest of its mount, and its fabulous head dominated the man's forehead, like one of those horrible helmets with which ancient warriors sought to increase the terror of their enemies. I questioned one of the men, asking him where they were going like that. He replied that neither he nor the others knew, but that, without a doubt, they were going somewhere, since they were impelled by an invincible need to walk. Curious observation, none of those travelers seemed irritated against the furious animal, hanging from his neck and attached to his back. It would have been said that they considered it as part of themselves. So many tired and serious faces, they showed no despair. Under the splenic layer of the sky, their feet sunk in the dust of a ground as desolate as the sky itself, they walked with the resigned face of those condemned to wait forever. And the procession passed by me, and sank into the atmosphere of the horizon, by the place where the rounded surface of the planet eludes the curiosity of the human gaze. I persisted for a few moments in wanting to penetrate the mystery, but soon the irresistible indifference fell upon me, and I was more deeply overwhelmed than the others with their overwhelming chimeras. The Fool and Venus. What an admirable day! The vast park faints before the scorching gaze of the sun, like youth under the domination of love. The universal ecstasy of things is not expressed by any noise, the same waters are as if asleep. Far different from human parties, this is a silent orgy. It would seem that an ever-increasing light gives things an ever-increasing sparkle, that excited flowers burn with the desire to compete with the blue of the sky for the energy of their colors, and that the heat, which makes the perfumes visible, lifts them towards the star like smoke. But among the universal joy I have seen an afflicted being. At the feet of a colossal Venus, one of those artificial madmen, one of those voluntary buffoons who are in charge of making kings laugh when remorse or boredom obsesses them, decked out in a brilliant and ridiculous suit, with a horned headdress and bells, huddled by the pedestal, raises his tear-filled eyes to the immortal goddess. And their eyes say, I am the last, the loneliest of human beings, deprived of love and friendship. I am far inferior to the most imperfect animal. I am done, however, so am I, to comprehend and feel the immortal beauty. Oh, Goddess! Have pity on my sadness and my delirium. But I don't know what implacable Venus is looking at in the distance with her marble eyes. The dog and the jar. My cute dog, good dog, dear Pooch, come and breathe an excellent perfume, bought in the best perfumery in the city. And the dog, wagging its tail, a sign, I believe, that in these petty beings it corresponds to laughter and smiles, approaches and curiously pokes its wet nose into the uncovered bottle, then, drawing back in sudden fear, he barks at me, as if rebuking me. Ah, miserable dog! If I had offered you a pile of excrement, you would have sniffed it with delight, perhaps devoured it. Thus you, unworthy companion of my sad life, resemble the public, who should never be offered delicate perfumes that exasperate them, but carefully chosen rubbish. The bad glazier. There are purely contemplative natures, totally unfit for action, which, however, thanks to a mysterious and unknown impulse, sometimes act with speed that they would have thought incapable of. The one who, afraid that the doorman will give him sad news, spends an hour hanging around his door without daring to return home, those who keep a letter unopened for 15 days or do not resign themselves until after 6 months to take a necessary step from a year before, come to feel suddenly rushed into action by an irresistible force, like an arrow from a bow. The moralist and the doctor, who claim to know everything, cannot explain where such sudden and crazy energy comes from to lazy and voluptuous souls, and how, unable to carry out the simplest and most necessary things, they find at a certain moment a value. Luxury to carry out the most absurd and even the most dangerous acts. A friend of mine, the most harmless dreamer that ever lived, once set fire to a forest, to see, he said, if the fire spread as easily as is said. 10 times in a row the experiment failed, but at the 11th it had to turn out too well. Another will light a cigar next to a barrel of gunpowder, to see, to know, to tempt fate, to force himself to a test of energy, to pretend to be a player, to know the pleasures of anxiety, for nothing, on a whim, for lack of chore. It is a kind of energy that flows from boredom and wandering, and those in whom it manifests itself so frankly are usually, as I said, the most indolent creatures, the most dreamy. Another, shy to the point of lowering his eyes even in the gaze of men, to the point of having to resort to all his poor will to enter a café or go through a theatre box office, where the ticket clerks seem invested with a majesty of Minos, Aeacus, and Rhadamanthus. He will throw his arms around the neck of an old man who passes by him, and kiss him enthusiastically in front of the astonished crowd. Why? Why? Because that physiognomy was irresistibly nice to him. Maybe, but it is more legitimate to suppose that he himself does not know why. More than once I have been the victim of similar attacks and impulses, which authorize us to believe that some malicious demons get inside us and order us to do, without our realizing it, their most absurd wills. One morning I woke up unpleasant, sad, tired of idleness and moved, as it seemed to me, to carry out something great, an action of brilliance. I opened the window. Oh my! Observe, I beg you, that the spirit of mystification, which in certain people is not the result of work or any combination, but of fortuitous inspiration, participates a lot, if only because of the ardor of desire, of humor, hysterical when saying of doctors, satanic according to those who think a little better than doctors, who moves us without resistance to a multitude of dangerous and inconvenient actions. The first person I saw in the street was a glazier, whose penetrating, discordant cry rose to me through the thick and dirty Parisian atmosphere. It would be impossible for me, moreover, to say why a hatred as sudden as despotic overtook me for that poor man. I yelled at him to come up. Meanwhile, he reflected, not without a certain joy, that, since the room was on the 6th floor and the stairs were very narrow, the man would make his ascent not without trouble and the ends of his fragile merchandise would trip more than once. He introduced himself at the end. I curiously examined all his windows and said to him, "How? Don't have colored crystals? Pink, red, blue crystals, magic crystals, paradise crystals. Will there be recklessness? And dare you walk through the poor neighborhoods without even having crystals that make life look beautiful?" And I pushed him briskly to the stairs, where, grunting, he stumbled. I reached the balcony and seized a small flower pot, and when he came out of the doorway I let my war machine fall perpendicularly onto the trailing edge of his hooks, and, knocked down by the impact, his entire body ended up breaking under his back. Petty traveling merchandise, with the crash of a crystal palace split by lightning. And intoxicated by my madness, I yelled at him furiously, "The beautiful life, the beautiful life." Such nervous jokes are not without danger and often come at a high price. But what? Eternal damnation matters to those who found in a second the infinite of enjoyment. At 1 in the morning. Alone at last. You can no longer hear more than the rolling of some lagging and broken cars. For a few hours we have to have silence, if not rest. At last the tyranny of the human face disappeared, and I will suffer only for myself. At last. I am already allowed to rest in a bath of darkness. First thing, double turn the bolt. It seems to me that this turn of the key will increase my loneliness and strengthen the barricades that currently separate me from the world. Awful life. Horrible city. Let's recap the day. Seeing several men of letters, one of whom asked me if it was possible to go to Russia by land. He undoubtedly took Russia for an island dash, arguing generously with the editor of a magazine, who, to every objection, replied, "This is the party of honest men," which implies that the other newspapers are written by scoundrels, greet about 20 people, 15 of them strangers, distribute handshakes, in equal proportion, without having taken the precaution of buying gloves. Going up, to pass the time, during a downpour, to the house of a certain corset maker, who begged me to draw a Venus-tray costume for her, to make the bagel to the director of a theater, so that, when saying goodbye, he says to me, maybe he hits it by addressing Z. He is, of all my authors, the heaviest, the dumbest, and the most famous. With him you could achieve something. Talk to him, and we'll see there. Praise myself. Why? For several ugly actions that I never committed and cowardly deny some other misdeeds that I carried out with joy, a crime of bravado, a crime of human respect, to deny a friend a certain easy favor and to give a written recommendation to a thoroughbred scoundrel. Phew! It's over. Dissatisfied with everyone, dissatisfied with myself, I would like to rescue myself and gain a little pride in the silence and solitude of the night. Souls of those I loved, souls of those I sang of, strengthen me, sustain me, keep lies and the corrupting vapors of the world away from me, and you, Lord, my God, grant me the grace to produce some good verses, which prove to myself that I am not the least of men, that I am not inferior to those I despise. The wild woman and the darling. In truth, my dear, you annoy me without rate and compassion. It would seem, hearing you sigh, that you suffer more than the 60-year-old gleaners and the old beggars who go collecting crusts of bread at the doors of the taverns. If your sighs expressed even remorse, they would do you some honor, but they only translate the satiety of well-being and the burden of rest. And, besides, you don't stop pouring yourself into useless words. Love me. I need it so much. Comfort me here, caress me there. Look, I am going to try to cure you. Maybe for 2 salaries we can find a way, in the middle of a party and without going too far. Let us look well, I beg you, at this solid iron cage behind which he stirs, howling like a condemned man, shaking the bars like an orangutan exasperated by exile, imitating perfectly now the circular leaps of the tiger, now the stupid sways of the white bear, that shaggy monster whose shape vaguely imitates yours. That monster is an animal of those who are usually called my angel, that is, a woman. That monster, the one who screams at the top of his voice, with a club in his hand, is her husband. He has chained his legitimate wife like an animal, and he shows her around the neighborhoods, on fair days, with the permission of the magistrates. There was no more. Look closely. You see with what voracity, perhaps not simulated, he destroys live rabbits and screeching volatile ones, which his cornac throws at him. Wow, he says, you don't have to eat it all in one day. And after prudent words he cruelly pulls off the prey, leaving for an instant the skein of waste attached to the teeth of the ferocious beast, I mean to the woman. Hey, a stick to calm her down, because he is arrowing with terrible eyes of covetousness the snatched food. Eternal God! The stick is not a comedy stick. Did you hear the meat ring, despite the false hair? That's why now his eyes pop out of his head and he howls very naturally. In her rage, she flashes all over, like iron on the anvil. Such are the conjugal customs of these two descendants of Eve and Adam, works of your hands, my God. Unquestionably, unfortunate is this woman, although, ultimately, perhaps the flickering joys of glory are not unknown. There are more irremediable misfortunes that have no compensation. But in the world she was thrown into, she could never think that a woman deserved another fate. Let's talk now, you and I, precious dear. In view of the hells that populate the world, what am I to think of your beautiful hell, if you only rest on fabrics as soft as your skin, and only eat cooked meats, the pieces of which a domestic takes care to carve skilled? And what can all those little sighs that swell your perfumed chest mean to me, robust coquette? And all those affectations learned in books, and that indefatigable melancholy, made to inspire in the spectators a feeling altogether different from pity? In truth, I sometimes want to show you what true misery is. Seeing you like this, my beautiful delicate one, with your feet in the mud, your eyes vaporously turned to the sky, as if asking for a king, you would be taken for a young frog invoking the ideal. If you despise the beam, what I am now, as you know, beware of the crane that will chew you up, swallow you and kill you at will. No matter how poetic I am not as naive as you would like to believe, and if you tire me often enough with your exquisite whining, I must treat you like a wild woman, or throw you out of the window like an empty bottle. The crowds. It is not given to everyone to take a crowd bath. Enjoying the crowd is an art, and only he who in his cradle was breathed by a fairy the taste of disguise and the mask, the hatred of home and the passion for travel can only give rise to a binge of vitality at the expense of the human race. Crowd, loneliness, equal and convertible terms for the active and fruitful poet. He who does not know how to populate his solitude, does not know how to be alone in a busy crowd either. The poet enjoys the incomparable privilege of being able to be himself and be others in his own way. Like wandering souls in search of a body, it enters each person's person when it wants. Only for him is everything vacant, and if certain places seem closed to you, it will be that in your eyes they are not worth a visit. The solitary and pensive walker draws a singular intoxication from this universal communion. He who easily marries the crowd, knows feverish pleasures, of which the egoist, closed as a chest, and the lazy, internal as a mollusk, will be eternally deprived. He adopts as his own all the professions, all the joys and all the miseries that circumstances offer him. What men call love is too small, too restricted and weak, compared to this ineffable orgy, to this holy prostitution of the soul, which is given all of it, poetry and charity, to the unforeseen that reveals itself, to the unknown that passes. It is good to tell the lucky ones of this world once in a while, if only to humiliate their foolish pride for a moment, that there are better fortunes than theirs, vaster and more refined. The founders of colonies, the shepherds of towns, the missionary priests, exiled in the external world, undoubtedly know something of these mysterious intoxications, and in the bosom of the vast family that his genius formed, sometime they have to laugh at those who pity them for their fortune, so troubled, and for their life, so chaste. Widows. Vauvenargues says that in public gardens there are walks frequented mainly by a diminished ambition, by unfortunate inventors, by aborted glories, by broken hearts, by all those trembling and closed souls in which the last breaths of a storm still roar. Who move away from the insolent gaze of the satisfied and the idle. In these shady refuges the crippled by life meet. To these places, above all, the poet and the philosopher like to direct their avid conjectures. True grass is in them. Because if they disdain to visit any place, it is, above all, as I hinted a moment ago, the happiness of the rich. Such turbulence in a vacuum has nothing to attract them. On the contrary, feel irresistibly drawn towards everything that is weak, ruined, saddened, orphaned. An expert look is never deceived. In those rigid or dejected features, in those sunken and cloudy eyes or bright with the last flashes of the fight, in those deep and multiple wrinkles, in that walk so slow or so abrupt, instantly decipher the innumerable legends of deceived love, of the self-denial misunderstood, the efforts without reward, the hunger and the cold endured humbly and silently. Did you ever see poor widows on those lonely benches? In mourning or not, it is easy to meet them. In addition, there is always something missing in the mourning of the poor, an absence of harmony that makes him even more disconsolate. He is forced to spare his pain. The rich take theirs from boat to boat. Which widow is more sad and saddening, the one who pulls by the hand of a child, with whom she cannot share her wandering, or the one who is all alone? I don't know. Once I managed to follow an old woman of that kind for long hours, stiff, upright, in a short worn shawl. She carried in her whole being a stoic haughtiness. She was evidently condemned by absolute solitude to the habits of a bachelor, and the masculine character of her customs put a mysterious flavor in her austerity. I don't know what miserable café or how he had lunch. I followed her into the reading table, and watched her long, while she searched the gazettes with active eyes, long since burned with tears, for news of powerful and personal interest. At last, in the evening, under a lovely autumn sky, one of those skies from which sorrows and memories descend in multitudes, he sat apart in a garden, to listen, far from the crowd, to one of those concerts with which the music of the regiments gives to the Parisian people. That was, without a doubt, the excess of the innocent old woman or of the purified old woman the well-earned consolation of one of those heavy days without a friend, without talk, without joy, without a confidant, that God let fall on her, perhaps since many years before, 365 times a year. One more. I could never contain a look, if not of universal sympathy, at least curious, at the crowd of outcasts that crowd around the venue of a public concert. The orchestra launches, through the night, songs of celebration, of triumph or of pleasure. The women's dresses drag shining, eyes cross, the idle, tired of doing nothing, sway, indolently pretend to savor the music. Hear nothing that is not rich, fortunate, nothing that does not breathe and inspire carelessness and the joy of letting oneself live, nothing, except the appearance of that mob that leans there, in the outer fence, catching free, at the mercy of the wind, a shred of music and looking at the sparkling oven inside. The reflection of the joy of the rich in the depths of the eyes of the poor has always been interesting. But that day, through the town dressed in a blouse and Indiana, I saw a being whose nobility formed a striking contrast with all the triviality of the surroundings. She was a tall, majestic woman and of such nobility in all her bearing that I have no memory of hers in the collections of the aristocratic beauties of the past. A perfume of haughty virtue emanated from his entire person. Her face, sad and emaciated, matched perfectly with the rigorous mourning in which she was dressed. Also, like the common people with whom he had mixed without seeing her, he looked at the luminous world with deep eyes, and, gently bowing his head, listened. Unique vision. Surely, I said to myself, that poverty, if there is such poverty, must not admit the sordid economy. Such a noble face trusts me. Why, then, does it voluntarily remain in an environment in which it is such a conspicuous stain? But, as I passed curiously by her, I thought I guessed the reason. The tall widow led by the hand a child, dressed, like her, in black. No matter how modest the price of the ticket was, perhaps that price was enough to one day pay for the needs of the creature, or, perhaps better, a superfluity, a toy. And she will have returned home on foot, meditating and dreaming, alone, because the child is mischievous, selfish, has no sweetness or patience, and cannot even, like the pure animal, like the cat and the dog, serve as a confidant. To lonely pain. The old mountebank. Everywhere it was flaunted, spilled out, the people rejoiced in feasting. It was a solemnity of those that, well in advance, are the hope of mountebanks, conjurers, bug tamers and street vendors, to make up for the bad times of the year. On days like this, the people seem to forget everything, pain and work. He becomes like children. For the children it is a day off, it is the horror of school postponed for 24 hours. For the elderly it is an armistice agreed with the malefic powers of life, a stop in the contention and the universal fight. Even the man of the world and the man given to spiritual works hardly escape the influence of popular jubilation. They inadvertently absorb their share of that carefree atmosphere. As far as I am concerned, I never fail, like a good Parisian, to review all the barracks that strut their stuff in those solemn times. In truth, they made formidable competition, they yelled, they bellowed, they howled. It was a hodgepodge of screams, copper detonations, and rocket explosions. Puppeteers and clowns convulsed the features of their swarthy faces, weathered by wind, rain, and sun, with the aplomb of comedians sure of effect. They unleashed jokes and jokes, with a solid and dense comedy like that of Molière. The Hercules, proud of the enormity of their limbs, without foreheads and skulls, like orangutans, swelled majestically under the tights washed the day before for the solemnity. The ballerinas, beautiful as fairies or princesses, jumped and capered in the glow of the lanterns, which filled their skirts with sparks. There was nothing but light, dust, shouts, joy, tumult, some spent, others earned, some were happy alike. Children would hang from their mothers' skirts to get a candy bar, or climb on their fathers' shoulders to get a good look at a shimmering shimmer like a divinity. And everywhere circulated, dominating all the perfumes, a smell of fried food, which was like the incense of the party. At the end, at the last end of the row of huts, as if, shameful, he had banished himself from all those splendors, I saw a poor mountebank, bent over, decrepit, the ruin of a man, leaning against a post of his hut more miserable than that of the brutalized savage, still well lit in its desolation by two straight and smoking candle ends. Everywhere, joy, profit, lightness, everywhere, certainty of tomorrow's bread, everywhere, frenetic explosion of vitality. Here, absolute misery, muffled misery, to top it off with horror, in comic rags, in contrast brought about, more than by art, by necessity. That wretch was not laughing. She didn't cry, she didn't dance, she didn't gesticulate, she didn't shout, she didn't sing any song, happy or lamentable, nor did she implore. He was mute, motionless, he had resigned, abdicated. His destiny was fulfilled. But, what a deep, unforgettable gaze, he wandered through the crowd and the lights, whose moving waves would stop a few steps from his repulsive misery. I felt the terrible hand of hysteria oppress my throat, and it seemed to me that my eyes were clouded with rebellious tears, the kind that refused to fall. What would I do? Why ask the unfortunate what curiosity, what wonder could he teach in that stinking darkness, behind the torn curtain? I didn't dare, really, and although the reason for my shyness should make you laugh, I will confess that I was afraid to humiliate him. I had finally made up my mind to leave some money on one of those tables, waiting for him to guess my intent, when a great rush of people, caused by I don't know what disturbance, had to drag me away from there. And when I left, obsessed by that vision, I tried to analyze my sudden pain, and I said to myself, I have just seen the image of the old man of letters, a survivor of the generation that was brilliant entertainment, of the old poet without friends, without family, without children, degraded by misery and public ingratitude, in the shack where forgetful people no longer want to enter. The cake. I was traveling. The landscape in the midst of which I had placed myself had irresistible grandeur and nobility. Something of them was undoubtedly communicated at that moment to my soul. My thoughts fluttered with a lightness equal to that of the atmosphere. Vulgar passions, such as hatred and profane love, already appeared to me as far away as the clouds that paraded through the bottom of the abysses. At my feet, my soul seemed to me as vast and pure as the dome of heaven that enveloped me. The memory of earthly things reached my heart only weakened and diminished, like the sound of the shearing of the imperceptible herds that pass far, far away, on the slopes of another mountain. Over the small, motionless lake, black from its immense depth, the shadow of a cloud passed from time to time, like the reflection of the cloak of an aerial giant flying across the sky. And I remember that solemn and strange sensation, caused by a perfectly silent great movement, filled me with a joy mixed with fear. In short, that I felt, thanks to the intoxicating beauty that surrounded me, at perfect peace with myself and with the universe, and I even suspect that in my perfect beatitude and in my total forgetfulness of all terrestrial evil, I had come to find the newspapers that claim that man was born good not so ridiculous, when, renewed the demands of implacable matter, I thought of repairing fatigue and alleviate the appetite awakened by such a long climb. I took from my pocket a good piece of bread, a leather cup, and a vial of a certain elixir that the pharmacists of those days used to sell to tourists, to mix, when the occasion arose, with snow water. I was calmly breaking the bread, when a very slight noise made me raise my eyes. Before me was a ragged little creature, black, disheveled, whose deep-set eyes, cold and pleading, devoured the piece of bread. And I heard him sigh in a low and hoarse voice the word cake. I couldn't contain my laughter when I heard the name with which he deigned to honor my almost white bread. I cut a good slice and offered it to him. He approached slowly, without taking his eyes off the object of his covetousness. Then, seizing the piece, he drew back briskly, as if he had feared that my offer was insincere, or that he would turn me back. But at the same moment he was knocked down by another wild boy, who came from I don't know where, so perfectly similar to the first, that he could have been taken for his twin brother. Together they rolled on the ground, fighting over the prized prize, neither of them doubtless wanting to sacrifice half to their brother. The first, exasperated, grabbed the second by the hair, the latter took one of his ears between his teeth, and spat out a bloody bit, with a superb dialectal curse. The rightful owner of the cake tried to sink its little claws into the usurper's eyes. The latter, in turn, applied all his strength to strangle the adversary with one hand, while with the other he tried to pocket the prize of combat. But, revived by despair, the defeated one got up and sent the victor rolling on the ground with a head-butt to the stomach. Why describe a horrible fight, which lasted, in truth, longer than the childish forces seemed to promise? The cake traveled from hand to hand and changed pockets at every moment, but, alas, it was also changing in volume, and when, finally, exhausted, panting, bleeding, they stopped, unable to continue, there was, to tell the truth, no reason for battle. The piece of bread had disappeared and was scattered in crumbs, similar to the grains of sand with which they were mixed. This spectacle had filled the landscape with a mist, and the calm joy in which my soul had soothed itself, before I had seen the little men, had entirely disappeared. I remained sad for a long time, repeating to myself incessantly, so there is a superb country where they call bread cake, a sweet so rare that it is enough to engender a perfectly fratricidal war. The watch. The Chinese see time in the eyes of cats. One day, a missionary who was walking through a suburb of Nanking noticed that he had forgotten his watch, and he asked a boy what time it was. The boy from the Celestial Empire hesitated at once, then, coming to himself, he replied, "I am going to tell him." A few moments later he presented himself again, bringing a big cat, and looking at him, as they say, into the white of his eyes, he stated, without hesitation, "It's not 12 o'clock yet." And so it was in truth. If I lean towards the beautiful feline, the well-named one, who is at the same time the honor of her sex, the pride of my heart and the perfume of my spirit, whether at night or by day, in light or in opaque shadow in the depths of her adorable eyes, I always see the time clearly, always the same, a vast, solemn hour, as big as space, without division of minutes or seconds, a motionless hour that is not marked on clocks, and is yet light as a breath, quick as a glance. If someone importunate came to bother me while my gaze rests on such a delicious sphere, if some bad and intolerant genius, if some demon of mishaps came to tell me, "What are you looking at so carefully? What are you looking for in the eyes of that creature? Do you see the hour in them, prodigal and lazy mortal?" I, without hesitating, would answer, "Yes, I see the time in them. It's eternity." Isn't it true, madam, that this is a truly meritorious madrigal and as emphatic as yourself? Of course, I had so much pleasure in embroidering this presumptuous gallantry, that nothing, instead, I have to ask of you. A hemisphere in a hair. Let me breathe for a long time, the smell of your hair, immerse my face in them, like a thirsty man in spring water, and wave them with my hand, like a scented handkerchief, to shake memories into the air. If you could know everything I see, everything I feel, everything I hear in your hair. My soul travels in perfume like the soul of other men in music. Your hair contains a whole dream, full of sails and masts. They contain vast seas, whose monsoons take me to enchanting climates, where space is bluer and deeper, where the atmosphere is perfumed by fruits, leaves, and human skin. In the ocean of your hair I envision a port teeming with melancholic songs, vigorous men of every nation and ships of every shape, whose fine and complicated architectures cut out in an immense sky where eternal heat lolls. In the caresses of your hair I rediscover the languor of the long hours spent on a divan, in the chamber of a beautiful ship, rocked by the imperceptible rocking of the port, among pots and refreshing jugs. In the burning hearth of your hair I breathe the smell of tobacco mixed with opium and sugar. In the night of your hair I see the infinity of tropical blue shine. On the fluffy edges of your hair I get drunk with the combined smells of cotton, musk and coconut oil. Let me bite your braids long, heavy and black. When I nibble on your elastic and unruly hair, it seems to me that I eat memories. The gifts of the fairies. There was a great assembly of fairies to proceed with the distribution of gifts among all the newborns that had come to life in the last 24 hours. All those ancient and capricious sisters of fate, all those rare mothers of joy and pain were very different. They had a gloomy and frowning aspect, others, crazy and malicious aspect, some, young people who had always been young, others, old who had always been old. All the parents who have faith in fairies had come, each carrying their newborn in their arms. The gifts, the faculties, the good chances, the invincible circumstances had accumulated next to the court, like the prizes on the platform for their distribution. What was particular about it was that the gifts did not serve as a reward for an effort, but, on the contrary, they were a grace granted to those who had not yet lived, a grace capable of determining their destiny and becoming the source of their misfortune than his happiness. The poor fairies were very busy, because the crowd of applicants was great, and the intermediary people placed between man and God are subject, like us, to the terrible law of time and its infinite posterity, the days, the hours, the minutes, and the seconds. In truth, they were as embarrassed as ministers on the day of an audience or as employees of the Monte de Piedad when a national holiday authorizes free performances. I even think that from time to time they looked at the hand of the clock with as much impatience as human judges who, in session since morning, cannot help but dream of lunchtime, of family, and of their beloved slippers. If in supernatural justice there is some precipitation and chance, let us not be surprised that the same thing sometimes happens in human justice. We would be, in such a case, unjust judges. Certain lightnesses were also committed that day that could be called strange if prudence, more than caprice, were the distinctive and eternal character of fairies. Thus, the power to magically attract fortune was awarded to the sole heir of a very rich family, which, because it was not endowed with any sense of charity or any greed for the most visible goods of life, had to be seen later prodigiously entangled among their millions. Thus, the love of beauty and poetic force was given to the son of a gloomy pauper, a stonemason by trade, who in no way asked to favor the dispositions or alleviate the needs of his deplorable offspring. I forgot to tell you that the distribution, in such solemn cases, is without appeal, and that there is no gift that can be refused. All the fairies got up, believing their job was done, because there was no gift left, no largesse to throw at all that human trash, when a good man, a poor little tradesman, I think, got up, and taking the multicolored vapor dress fairy who was closest, exclaimed, "Hey! Mess! Who forgets us? My boy is still missing. I don't want to have come in vain." The fairy could be in a bind, because nothing was left any more. He remembered in time, however, a well-known law, although rarely applied, in the supernatural world inhabited by those impalpable deities who are friends of man and often forced to submit to their passions, such as fairies, gnomes, the salamanders, the sylphs, the nixes, the undines, and the undines. I mean the law that grants fairies, in similar cases, that is, in the case of having exhausted the lots, the power to grant another, supplementary and exceptional, as long as you have enough imagination to create it suddenly. Thus, the good fairy answered, with aplomb worthy of her rank, "I give to your son, I give him, the gift of pleasing." "But please how?" Like why?" asked the little shopkeeper tenaciously, who was undoubtedly one of those abundant reasoners, incapable of rising to the logic of the absurd. Because if, replied the angry fairy, turning her back on him, and as she joined the procession of her companions, she would say to them, "What do you think of that vain little Frenchman, who wants to understand everything, and who, in addition to achieving the best gift for his son, still dares to ask and discuss the indisputable? The poor man's toy. I want to give an idea of innocent fun. There are so few entertainments that are not guilty. When you leave in the morning with the determined intention of wandering along the road, fill your pockets with those small two-quart inventions, such as the polycanella without relief, moved by a thread no more, the blacksmiths who hammer on the anvil, the rider on a horse, who has a whistle for a tail, and in front of the taverns, at the foot of the trees, give them to the unknown and poor children you meet. You will see how their eyes enlarge disproportionately. At first they will not dare to take them, doubtful of their luck. Then, their hands will grab the gift, and they will run like cats that are going to eat away the slice that you gave them, because they have learned to distrust man. In a road, behind the gate of a vast garden, at the end of which appeared the whiteness of a pretty sun-scarred castle, stood a handsome, fresh-faced boy, dressed in one of those country clothes so full of coquetry. Luxury, insouciance, the usual spectacle of wealth, make these boys so handsome that they would be believed to be made of a different material than the children of mediocrity or poverty. Beside him lay on the grass a splendid toy, as new as its master, shiny, golden, dressed in a purple dress, and covered with tufts and glass beads. But the boy was not busy with his favorite toy, and look what he was looking at. On the other side of the gate, on the road, between thistles and nettles, there was another boy, dirty, emaciated, sooty, one of those outcast children, whose beauty would be discovered by impartial eyes, if, like the eyes of an amateur, they divine a painting. Ideal under a car varnish, they will clean it of the disgusting patina of misery. Through the symbolic bars that separated two worlds, the road and the castle, the poor boy showed the rich boy his own toy, and the rich boy examined it avidly, like a rare and unknown object. And that toy that the ragged man harassed, shook and shook in a cage, was a live mouse. The parents, doubtless out of economy, had removed the toy from life itself. And the two children laughed at each other, brotherly, with teeth of equal whiteness. The invitation to travel. There is a superb country, a country of Georgia, they say, that I dream of visiting with an old friend. A singular country, drowned in the mists of our north, and which could be called the east of the west, the China of Europe. Warm and capricious fantasy has taken such a career in it, so patiently and tenaciously he illustrated it with his tasty and delicate vegetations. A true country of Georgia, in which everything is beautiful, rich, calm, honest, in which luxury is reflected at will in order, in which life is crass and soft to breathe, from where disorder, turbulence and the unexpected are excluded, in which happiness married silence, in which even the kitchen is poetic, rich and exciting, in which everything resembles you, my angel. Do you know the feverish illness that takes over us in cold miseries, the ignored nostalgia for the earth, the anguish of curiosity? There is a country that resembles you, where everything is beautiful, rich, calm and honest, where fantasy built and decorated a western China, where life is easy to breathe, where happiness married silence. That's where you have to go live, that's where you have to die. Yes, there you have to go to breathe, to dream, to lengthen the hours in the infinite of sensations. A musician has written the invitation to the waltz, who will be the one to compose the invitation to the trip that can be offered to the beloved woman, to the sister of choice. Yes, in that atmosphere it would be nice to live, there, where the slowest hours contain more thoughts, where the clocks strike happiness with deeper and more significant solemnity. On gleaming boards or gilded leathers with somber richness, blissful paintings live discreetly, calm and deep, like the souls of the artists who created them. The sunsets, which so richly color the dining room or the living room, are filtered by beautiful mantels or by those tall carved windows that the lead divides into numerous compartments. Vast, curious, rare are the furniture, armed with locks and secrets, like refined souls. Mirrors, metals, fabrics, gold and silverware, china, concert there for the eyes a mute and mysterious symphony, and from everything, from every corner, from the cracks in the drawers and from the folds of the fabrics a singular perfume escapes, a Sumatran velvet, which is like the soul of the house. A true country of Georgia, I tell you, where everything is rich, clean and shiny like a good conscience, like magnificent kitchenware, like splendid goldsmiths, like polychrome jewelry. There the treasures of the world flow, like to the house of a hard-working man who deserved well from the whole world. Unique country, superior to the others, as art is to nature, in which it is reformed by dreams, in which it is corrected, beautified, recast. Seek, keep on seeking, endlessly push the limits of your happiness away, those alchemists of horticulture. Propose prizes of 60 and 100,000 guilders for whoever solves your ambitious problems. I already found my black tulip and my blue dahlia. Incomparable flower, tulip found again, allegorical dahlia, there, to that beautiful country so calm, so dreamy, is where one should go to live and flourish, isn't it true? Would you not find yourself there with your analogy by frame, and could you not look at yourself, to speak, like the mystics, in your own correspondence? Dreams. Always dreams. And the more ambitious and delicate the soul, the more dreams take it away from the possible. Each man carries within himself his dose of natural opium, incessantly secreted and renewed, and, from birth to death, how many hours do we count full of positive joy, of well-achieved and determined action? Will we ever live, will we ever be in that picture that my spirit painted for you, in that picture that resembles you? These treasures, these furniture, this luxury, this order, these perfumes, these miraculous flowers are you. You are also these great rivers, these calm channels. The enormous ships that drag, all loaded with riches, from which the monotonous songs of the maneuver come out, are my thoughts, which sleep or roll on your bosom. You gently guide them towards the sea, which is infinite, while you reflect the depths of the sky in the limpidity of your beautiful soul, and when, exhausted by the tide and fed up with the products of the East, they return to their home port, they are still my thoughts, which return enriched from infinity to you. The temptations, or Eros, Pluto, and glory. Two Satans and a devil, no less extraordinary, climbed last night the mysterious ladder with which hell assaults the weakness of the sleeping man and secretly communicates with him. And they came to stand before me gloriously, standing as if on a dais. A sulphuric splendor emanated from the three characters, thus standing out against the opaque background of the night. They looked so haughty and domineering that I immediately took all three of them for true gods. The face of the first Satan was of ambiguous sex, and there was also, in the lines of his body, the malice of the ancient Bacchus. Her beautiful languid eyes, dark and indecisive in color, seemed violets still laden with the dense tears of the storm, and her lips, half open, warm cauldrons, exhaling a sweet-smelling perfume, and every time he sighed, musky insects fluttered with light at the ardor of his breath. Wrapped around his purple tunic, like a belt, was a serpent of changing tones that, raising its head, turned languidly towards him its ember eyes. From that living belt hung, alternated with vials filled with sinister liquors, shiny knives and surgical instruments. In his right hand he held another vial, the contents of which were luminous red, labeled with these strange words, "Drink, this is my blood, cordial perfect." On the left, a violin, which undoubtedly served him to sing his pleasures and pains and to spread the contagion of his madness on coven nights. They dragged from their delicate ankles several links of a broken gold chain, and when the annoyance it caused him forced him to lower his eyes to the ground, he would gaze vainly at the nails on his feet, brilliant and polished as well-carved stones. He looked at me with eyes of inconsolable sorrow, which poured out insidious intoxication, and he told me in a charming voice, if you want, I will make you lord of souls, and you will be master of living matter, more than the sculptor can be of the mud, and you will know the pleasure, incessantly reborn, of leaving yourself to forget yourself in others and of attracting souls until you confuse them with yours. And I answered him, I thank you very much. It is of no use to me that trifle of beings that are certainly not worth more than my poor self. Although something embarrasses me to remember, I can't forget anything, and at least I won't know you, old monster, your mysterious knives, your mistaken blisters, the chains that bind your feet, are symbols that explain quite clearly the drawbacks of your friendship. Save your gifts. The second Satan did not have the tragic and smiling appearance, nor the insinuating good manners, nor the delicate and perfumed beauty of the other. He was a coarse man, with a thick face and no eyes, whose heavy belly collapsed on his thighs, whose skin was all golden and illustrated, as by a tattoo, with a multitude of moving figures, representing the multiple forms of universal misery. Haggard little men willingly hanging on a nail. There were small, deformed, skinny gnomes who begged more with pleading eyes than with trembling hands, and also old mothers with miscarriages clinging to their exhausted breasts, and there were many more. The fat Satan struck his immense paunch with his fist, from which a long, resounding tinkle of metal would then issue, ending in a vague moan made of numerous human voices. And he laughed, shamelessly showing his damaged teeth. With a huge imbecile laugh, like certain men in all countries when they have eaten too well. And he said to me, I can give you what achieves everything, what is worth everything, what replaces everything. And he hit his monstrous belly, whose resounding echo served as a comment on the rude words. I turned with disgust and answered, I do not need, for my enjoyment, the misery of anyone, and I don't want wealth saddened, like wallpaper, for all the misfortunes represented on your skin. As for the devil, I would be lying if I did not confess that at first sight I found her strange charm. To define such charm, I could not compare it to anything better than that of the most beautiful mature women, who, however, no longer age, and whose beauty preserves the penetrating magic of the ruins. He looked both imperious and lanky, and his eyes, despite their weariness, retained a fascinating power. What caught my attention the most was the mystery of her voice, in which I found the memory of the most delicious contraltos and also a bit of the hoarseness of throats washed incessantly by brandy. Do you want to know my power? Said the false goddess in her enchanting, paradoxical voice. Listens. And he raised to his lips a gigantic and ribboned trumpet like a kazoo, with the titles of all the newspapers in the universe, and through the trumpet he shouted my name, which rolled like this through space with the noise of 100,000 thunderclaps, and returned to me echoed by the echo of the most distant planet. Devil, I jumped, almost subdued, here's what's precious. But on examining the seductive tomboy more closely, I seemed to recognize her vaguely from having seen her prance around with some urchins I knew, and the hoarse sound of copper brought to my ears I don't know what memory of a prostituted trumpet. That's why I replied, with all my disdain, go away. I am not made to marry the lover of some that I do not want to name. I certainly had the right to be proud of such courageous self-denial. But unfortunately, I woke up and all my strength left me. In truth, I said to myself, he must have been very lethargic to show such scruples. Oh! If they could come back when I'm awake, I wouldn't be so delicate. And I invoked them aloud, begging them to forgive me, offering them that I would dishonor myself as often as necessary to deserve their favors, but it had seriously offended them, no doubt, because they have never returned. The twilight of the night. The day is falling. A great peace fills the poor minds, tired from daily work, and their thoughts already take on the tender or indecisive colors of twilight. However, from the top of the mountain, through the transparent clouds of sunset, a great howl reaches my balcony, made up of a multitude of discordant cries that space transforms into lugubrious harmony, like a rising tide or a storm that starts. Who are the unfortunates whom the afternoon does not calm down, and take, like owls, the arrival of night as a sign of a coven? This sinister howling comes to us from the black hospital perched on the mountain, and at sunset, smoking and contemplating the rest of the immense valley bristling with houses in which each window tells us, here is peace now, here is the joy of the family. I can, when the wind blows from above, rock my thought, amazed at that imitation of infernal harmonies. Twilight excites the mad. I remember that I had 2 friends who were sick at twilight. One, then ignoring any relationship of friendship and courtesy, mistreated the first one who arrived like a savage. I have seen him throw an excellent chicken at the head of a waiter, because he imagined seeing on it I don't know what insulting hieroglyph. The sunset, premisser of the deep enjoyments, spoiled the most succulent. The other, ambitious wounded, was becoming, as the light dimmed, more sour, more gloomy, more reluctant. Forgiving and sociable during the day, he was ruthless at night, and not only with others, but with himself, he rabidly wielded his twilight mania. The first died insane, unable to recognize his wife and son. The second carries within him the restlessness of a perpetual malaise, and even if he were bestowed with all the honors that republics and princes can bestow, I believe that twilight would kindle in him even the ardent yearning for imaginary distinctions. The night, which put darkness in her mind, brings light to mine, and, although it is not rare to see the same cause engendering 2 opposite effects, this always fills me with intrigue and alarm. O night! O refreshing darkness! You are for me a sign of an interior party, you are liberation from anguish. In the solitude of the plains, in the stony labyrinths of a capital, twinkle of stars, explosion of lanterns, you are the fireworks of the goddess Liberty. Twilight, how sweet and tender you are! The rosy radiance that still creeps along the horizon, like dying of the day under the victorious oppression of its night, the souls of the chandeliers that put opaque red spots on the last glories of the west, the heavy curtains that an invisible hand draws back from the depths of the Orient, they initiate all the complicated feelings that fight within the heart of man in the solemn hours of life. It would also be taken for one of those rare ballerina costumes in which the transparent and somber gauze reveals the muffled splendors of a brilliant skirt, as the delicious past shines through under the black present, and the flickering stars of gold and silver that dot it. They represent those fantasy lights that don't light up well except in the deep morning of the night. Loneliness. A philanthropist hack tells me that loneliness is bad for man, and in support of his thesis he cites, like all unbelievers, words of the fathers of the church. I know that the devil gladly frequents arid places, and that the spirit of murder and lubricity ignites wonderfully in solitudes. But it would be possible that this solitude was only dangerous for the idle and wandering soul, which populates it with its passions and its chimeras. It is true that a charlatan, whose supreme pleasure consists in speaking from the height of a chair or a platform, would be in great danger of going mad in a rage on Robinson's Island. I will not demand of my news reporter the courageous virtues of Crusoe, but I ask you not to bring accusations against those in love with solitude and mystery. There are individuals among our talkative races who would accept the supreme punishment with less repugnance if they were allowed to launch a copious harangue from the top of the gallows, without fear that the drums of Santerre would suddenly cut off their words. I do not pity them, because I guess that their oratory effusions give them pleasures equal to those that others get from silence and recollection, but I despise them. Above all, I want my accursed newsgazer to let me amuse myself to my liking. But don't you ever feel, he says to me, in an arch-apostolic nasal tone, the need to share your joys? Look at the subtle envious. He knows that I disdain his and he comes to insinuate himself in mine, the horrible killjoy. The great misfortune of not being able to be alone. Says La Bruyere somewhere, as if to shame all those who rush to forget themselves in the crowd, fearful, no doubt, of not being able to stand themselves. Almost all our misfortunes come from not having known how to stay in our room, says another wise man, I think Pascal, thus calling the cell of seclusion all the crazy people who seek happiness in movement and in a prostitution that I would call fraternity, if I wanted to speak the beautiful language of my century. The projects. He said to himself, walking through a vast lonely park, how beautiful she would be in a short, complicated and lavish dress, going down, through the atmosphere of a beautiful afternoon, the marble steps of a palace, in front of extensive meadows of grass and ponds. Because she naturally looks like a princess. Later, passing through a street, he stopped in front of an engraving shop, and as he found a print in a folder, a representation of a tropical landscape, he said to himself, no. It is not in a palace that I would want to possess your beloved existence. We would not be home. Besides, the walls, riddled with gold, would leave no room to hang her image. In the solemn galleries there is no corner for privacy. Decidedly, that is where I should go to cultivate the dream of my life. And while his eyes analyzed the details of the engraving, he continued naturally. At the seashore, a beautiful wooden cabin, surrounded by all these strange and shining trees, whose names I forgot, in the atmosphere, an intoxicating aroma, indefinable, in the cabin, a powerful perfume of roses and musk, further away, behind our brief domain, tips of masts swayed by the tide, all around, beyond the room, illuminated by a pink light, filtered by the curtains, decorated with fresh mats and dizzying flowers and with strange seats of a Portuguese rococo, heavy and dark wood, where she would rest, so still, so well fanned, smoking slightly opiate tobacco. Beyond the veranda, the bustle of the birds, drunk with light, and the chatter of the black girls. And at night, to keep my dreams company, the plaintive singing of the music trees, of the melancholic phalaeos. Yes, there I have, in truth, the background that I was looking for. What do I want a palace for? And further on, walking along a large avenue, he saw a clean inn, with a window enlivened by multicolored Indiana curtains, from which two smiling heads appeared. And immediately, my thought must be very vagabond, he said to himself, to go looking so far for what is so close to me. Pleasure and fortune are found in the first inn that is seen, in the inn of chance, so fertile in voluptuousness. A good fire, colorful china, an acceptable dinner, harsh wine, a very wide bed, with somewhat coarse but new hangings. What's better? And when he returned home, at the time when the advice of wisdom is no longer muffled by the hum of exterior life, he said to himself, today, in a dream, I had 3 homes in which I found the same enjoyment. Why force the body to change places, if my soul travels so fast? And why execute projects, if the project itself is already enough enjoyment? The beautiful Dorothea. The sun overwhelms the city with its straight and terrible light, the sand shines and the sea mirrors. Cowardly, the stupefied world surrenders and takes a nap that is a kind of tasty death in which the sleeper, half awake, savors the pleasures of his annihilation. However, Dorothea, strong and haughty as the sun, advances down the deserted street, the only living being at this hour under the immense blue, and forms a bright black spot in the light. She moves forward, balancing her slim torso gracefully on her wide hips. Her tight-fitting silk dress, pale and pink, contrasts sharply with the darkness of her skin, precisely molding her long stem, her sunken back and her pointed chest. The red umbrella, sifting the light, projects the bloody shaving of its reflections on her dark face. The weight of her enormous almost blue hair pushes back her delicate head and gives her an air of triumph and laziness. Heavy earrings chirp secrets in their pretty ears. From time to time, the sea breeze lifts one end of her floating skirt and reveals her brilliant and superb leg, and her foot, similar to the feet of the marble goddesses that Europe encloses in its museums, faithfully imprints its shape on the fine sand. Because Dorothea is so prodigiously flirtatious that the pleasure of being admired overcomes her pride and freedom, and although she is free, she walks without shoes. She advances like this, harmoniously, happy to live, smiling, with a white smile, as if she saw in the distance, in space, a mirror that reflected her bearing and her beauty. At the time when the same dogs moan in pain at the sun that bites them, what powerful motive makes the lazy Dorothea walk like this, beautiful and cold as bronze? Why did she leave the narrow cabin, so coquettishly arranged with flowers and mats, which at so little cost make her a perfect boudoir, where he finds so much pleasure in combing his hair, in smoking, in being given air, or in looking at himself in the mirror of his wide feather fans, while the sea, which lashes the beach 100 paces away, gives his indecisive ramblings a powerful and monotonous accompaniment, and the iron kettle, in which a stew of crabs with rice and saffron is being cooked, sends you, from the back of the patio, its exciting perfumes. Perhaps he has an appointment with some officer who on distant beaches heard his companions speak of the famous Dorothea. Infallibly, the simple creature will ask her to describe the ball at the opera, and will ask her if she can go barefoot, like to the dance on Sunday, in which even the old Catherinas get drunk and furious with joy, and also if the beautiful ladies of Paris are all prettier than her. Dorothea is admired and flattered by everyone, and she would be perfectly happy if she did not have to pile piastre upon piastre to rescue her little sister, who will be 11 years old, and is already mature and so beautiful. The good Dorothea will surely succeed. The girl's master is so greedy. Too greedy to understand other beauty than that of the shields. The eyes of the poor. Ah, you want to know why I hate you today. It will be easier for you to understand it, no doubt, than for me to explain it to you, because you are, I think, the best example of feminine impermeability that can be found. Together we spent a long day, which seemed short to me. We had made a promise that all thoughts would be common to both of us, and our souls would no longer be more than one, dream that has nothing original, after all, unless, dreaming all men, never realized it. At dusk, a little tired, you wanted to sit in front of a new café that was on the corner of a boulevard, new, still full of rubble and already gloriously displaying its splendors, unfinished. The coffee sparkled. The gas itself displayed all the ardor of a premiere, and illuminated with all its might the blinding white walls, the dazzling canvases of the mirrors, the gilt half-rounds and cornices, the puffy-cheeked pages dragged by the dogs. On leashes, the laughing ladies with the falcon perched on their fists, the nymphs and goddesses carrying fruit, cakes, and game on their heads, Hebes and Ganymede offering the syrupy amphora or the bicolor obelisk of ice creams with a crest, the entire history of mythology placed at the service of gluttony. Right in front of us, in the stream, stood a poor man of about 40, with a tired face and a graying beard. She was holding a child by the hand, and with the other arm she was supporting a child weak enough to walk. She was babysitting, taking her children out into the evening air. All ragged. The 3 faces were extraordinarily serious, and the 6 eyes gazed fixedly at the new coffee, with equal admiration, which the years tinged differently. The father's eyes said, "How beautiful! That beautiful! It looks as if all the gold in the wretched world has been placed on those walls." The child's eyes, "How beautiful, how beautiful, but it is a house where only people who are not like us can enter." The younger boy's eyes were too fascinated to express anything other than profound, stupid joy. The songbooks often say that pleasure makes the soul good and softens hearts. As far as I'm concerned, the song was right that afternoon. Not only had that family of eyes touched me, but I was somewhat ashamed of our glasses and our bottles, greater than our thirst. I turned my eyes towards yours, my dear love, to read my thoughts in them. I immersed myself in your eyes, so beautiful and so strangely sweet, in your green eyes, inhabited by caprice and inspired by the moon, when you told me, "Those people are being unbearable to me with their eyes as open as garage doors. Why don't you ask the owner of the cafe to make them go away? It is so difficult to understand each other, dear angel, and thought is so incommunicable, even between beings who love each other." Heroic death. Fanciello was an admirable buffoon, almost a friend of the prince. But, for people consecrated to the comic by profession, the serious has fatal attractions, and strange as it may seem that the ideas of homeland and freedom despotically take over the brain of an actor, one day Fanciello took part in a certain conspiracy hatched by some disgruntled gentleman. Everywhere there are good men who denounce to the power those individuals with a bad mood, who want to dispossess princes and operate, without consulting it, the change of a society. The gentlemen in question were arrested, and with them Fanciello, and sentenced to certain death. I would gladly believe that the prince became angry at finding his favorite comedian among the rebels. The prince was neither better nor worse than the others, but an excessive sensitivity made him in many cases crueler and more despotic than all his peers. Passionate about the fine arts, and also understood in them like few others, he was truly insatiable of pleasures. Quite indifferent in relation to men and morality, a true artist in person, he knew of no more dangerous enemy than boredom, and the strange efforts he made to flee from this tyrant of the world or defeat him would certainly have attracted him, from a historian severe, the epithet of monster, if he had allowed something to be written in his domains that did not tend solely to pleasure or astonishment, which is one of the most delicate forms of pleasure. The great misfortune of that prince was never to have a theatre vast enough for his genius. There are young Neros who drown in limits that are too narrow. The centuries to come will always ignore his name and his goodwill. Providence, improvident, had given him faculties greater than his states. Suddenly the word spread that the sovereign wanted to grant grace to all the conspirators, and the origin of this rumor was the announcement of a great spectacle in which Fanciello was to represent one of his main and best roles, and which, according to reports, would also be attended by the condemned knights, an obvious sign, the superficial spirits added, of the generous tendencies of the offended prince. On the part of such a naturally and willfully eccentric man, anything was possible, even virtue, even clemency, especially if he thought he would find unexpected pleasures in her. But for those who, like me, had been able to penetrate further into the depths of that curious and sick soul, it was infinitely more likely that the prince wanted to judge the value of the stage talents of a man sentenced to death. He wanted to take advantage of the occasion to carry out a physiological experiment of capital interest, and to verify to what extent the habitual faculties of an artist could be altered or modified in the face of the extraordinary situation in which he found himself. After this, was there in his soul a more or less resolute intention of clemency? This is a point that has never been clarified. Finally, the great day arrived, and the small court displayed all its pomps. It would be difficult to conceive, without having seen it, how many splendors the privileged class of a state with restricted resources can display in a true solemnity. That one was doubly true, first, because of the magic of the luxury displayed, and then, because of the moral and mysterious interest that it carried with it. Master Fanciello excelled, above all, in the silent roles, or little loaded with words, which are usually the main ones in those magic dramas, whose object is symbolically represent the mystery of life. He entered the scene lightly and with perfect ease, and this helped to strengthen the idea of benignity and forgiveness in the noble audience. When it is said of a comedian, that is a good comedian, a formula is used that implies that, behind the character, the comedian can be guessed, that is, the art, the effort, the will. For if a comedian becomes, in relation to the character he is commissioned to express, what the best ancient statues, miraculously animated, alive, walking, seeing, could be, in relation to the general and confused idea of beauty, that would be, without a doubt, a singular and totally unexpected case. Fanciello was that night a perfect idealization, which it was impossible not to suppose alive, possible, real. The jester went, came, laughed, wept, convulsed, with an indestructible halo around his head, an invisible halo to all, but visible to me, which united in a strange amalgamation the rays of art with the glory of martyrdom. Fanciello introduced, by I don't know what special grace of his, the divine and the supernatural, even in the most extravagant antics. My pen trembles, and tears of ever-present emotion come to my eyes as I try to describe to you that unforgettable evening. Fanciello demonstrated to me, in a peremptory, irrefutable way, that the intoxication of art is more apt than any other to veil the terrors of the abyss, that the genius can perform comedy on the brink of the grave with a joy that does not let him see the grave, lost as he is in a paradise that excludes all idea of grave and destruction. All that audience, no matter how spoiled and frivolous it was, soon felt the omnipotent domination of the artist. No one dreamed of death, mourning or torture any more. Each one abandoned himself, without concern, to the multiple pleasures that the sight of a masterpiece of living art gives. The explosions of joy and admiration shook the vaults of the building several times with the energy of continuous thunder. Even the drunken prince mixed his applause with that of his court. However, to clairvoyant eyes, his drunkenness was not without mixture. Did he feel defeated in his power as a despot? Humiliated in his art of frightening hearts and dulling spirits? Frustrated in your hopes and shamed in your forecasts? Such assumptions, not exactly justified, but not at all unjustifiable, crossed my mind while I was contemplating the face of the prince, in which a new pallor was going to join incessantly with his usual pallor, like snow on snow. His lips pressed ever tighter, and his eyes lit up with an interior fire, similar to that of jealousy and hatred, even when he ostensibly applauded the talents of his former friend, the strange jester, who buffooned so well with death. At a certain moment I saw His Highness lean towards a little page, standing behind him, and whisper into his ear. The mischievous face of the pretty boy lit up with a smile, and he left briskly after the princely box, as if on some urgent errand. A few minutes later, a sharp, prolonged whistle interrupted Fanciullo in one of his best moments, and tore at the artist's ears and heart at the same time. From the place where this unexpected disapproval had sprung from, a boy rushed into the hallway, stifling his laughter. Fanciullo, shaken, waking from his sleep, first closed his eyes, then opened them again almost immediately, enormously enlarged, then opened his mouth as if to breathe convulsively, staggered a little forward, a little backward, and then suddenly fell dead on the tables. Had the whistle, quick as steel, really frustrated the executioner? Had the prince himself realized the murderous efficacy of his ruse? Doubt is allowed. Did you have feelings for your dear and inimitable Fanciullo? Sweet and legitimate is to believe it. The guilty gentleman had enjoyed the comedy show for the last time. That same night they were erased from life. Since then here, various mimes, justly appreciated in different countries, have come to represent before the court of, but none of them has been able to revive Fanciullo's marvelous talents or rise to the same favor. The counterfeit coin. As we moved away from the tobacconist's, my friend was making a careful separation of his coins. In the left pocket of his waistcoat he slipped some gold coins, on the right, small silver, in the left pocket of his trousers, a handful of copper, and finally, in the right, a 2-franc silver coin that he had examined in a particular way. Unique and meticulous cast. I said to myself. We ran into a poor man who handed us his cap trembling. I know of nothing more disturbing than the mute eloquence of those pleading eyes that have at the same time, for the sensitive man who knows how to read in them, so much humility and so many rebukes. He finds something close to that complicated depth of assent in the watery eyes of dogs when they are whipped. My friend's gift was much more considerable than mine, and I said it does good, after the pleasure of being surprised, there is no greater than that of causing a surprise. It was the counterfeit coin, he replied calmly, as if to justify his extravagance. But in my miserable brain, always busy looking for what is not found, what an overwhelming faculty nature has given me, suddenly entered the idea that such conduct on the part of my friend could only be excused by the desire to create an event in the life of that unfortunate man, and perhaps knowing the different consequences, disastrous or not, that a false coin can engender in the hands of a beggar. Couldn't it multiply into good pieces? Couldn't he also take him to jail? An innkeeper, a baker, for example, would perhaps have him arrested for a counterfeit purse, or as a counterfeit coin dealer. It could also happen that the false currency was, for a poor insignificant speculator, the germ of wealth for a few days. And so my fantasy progressed, lending wings to my friend's mind and drawing all possible deductions from all possible hypotheses. But he abruptly broke my ramble by picking up my own words. Yes, you are right, there is no sweeter pleasure than surprising a man by giving him more than he expects. I looked at the white of his eyes and was frightened to see that an undeniable candor shone in his. Then I saw clearly that he had wanted to do a charity and a good business at the same time, earn 40 salaries and the heart of God, economically reach paradise, achieve, finally, free credential of charitable man. I would almost have forgiven him the desire for criminal enjoyment of which I supposed him capable a little before. I would have found it curious, singular, that he amused himself by compromising the poor, but I will never forgive him for the ineptitude of his calculation. There is no excuse for wickedness, but he who is bad, if he knows it, has some merit. The most irreparable vice is that of doing evil out of foolishness. The generous player. Yesterday, in the crowd on the boulevard, I felt a mysterious being brush against me, whom I had always wanted to meet, and whom I recognized immediately. even though I had never seen him before. There was doubtless a similar desire in him for me, for as he passed he gave me a meaningful wink, to which I hastened to obey. I followed him attentively, and soon followed him down into a dazzling subterranean mansion, in which shone a luxury of which none of the superior rooms of Paris could offer an approximate example. It seemed strange to me that I could have passed so often near that mysterious shelter without guessing its entrance. There was an exquisite, if dizzying, atmosphere that made you almost instantly forget all the weary horrors of life. There was a somber bliss there, similar to what the lotus eaters must have felt when, upon landing on an enchanted island, illuminated by the radiance of an eternal spring afternoon, they felt the lulling sound of melodious waterfalls rise within them. The eye wished to never see his Penates, his women, his children again, and never to go rocking in the high waves of the sea. There were strange faces of men and women there, distinguished by a fatal beauty, which it seemed to me that I had already seen in times and in countries that I could not exactly remember, and that they inspired in me rather fraternal sympathy than that fear-born ordinary of the aspect of the unknown. If I tried to define in any way the singular expression of their gazes, I would say that I have never seen eyes in which the horror of boredom and the immortal desire to feel alive shone more energetically. My guest and I were already, when we sat down, old and perfect friends. We ate and drank without price all kinds of extraordinary wines, and what is even more extraordinary, it seemed to me, after several hours, that I was no more drunk than he was. However, the game, superhuman pleasure, had interrupted our frequent libations at various intervals, and I have to tell you that I had gambled and lost my soul, hand to hand, with a heroic insouciance and lightness. The soul is such an impalpable thing, so often useless, and sometimes so annoying, that when I lost it, I felt no more than a little less emotion than if I had lost a visiting card while going for a walk. We smoked a few cigars for a long time whose incomparable flavor and aroma gave the soul a nostalgia for unknown countries and adventures, and intoxicated with so many delicacies, I dared, in an access of familiarity that he did not seem to dislike, to exclaim, reaching for a glass full to the brim. "The edge, to your health, immortal old goat." We also talk about the universe, its creation and its future destruction, of the great idea of the century, that is, of progress and perfectibility, and, in general, of all forms of human infatuation. When it comes to this, His Highness did not exhaust the light and irrefutable jokes, expressing himself with a softness of diction and a tranquility in the joke that I have never seen in any of the most famous conversationalists of humanity. He explained to me the absurdity of the different philosophies that had taken possession of the human brain up to then, and he even deigned to declare to me, in confidence, some fundamental principles whose benefits and ownership it is not convenient for me to share with anyone. He did not complain in the least of the bad reputation which he enjoys in all parts of the world. He assured me that he, in person, was the one most interested in destroying superstition, and he even confessed that he had not feared for his own power more than once, the day he heard someone say from the pulpit to a preacher smarter than his confreres, "Dear brothers, never forget, when you hear praise for the progress of enlightenment, that the most beautiful cunning of the devil is to persuade you that it does not exist." The memory of that celebrated orator naturally led us to the subject of the academies. My strange guest told me that he was not less, in many cases, inspiring the pen, the word, the conscience of the pedagogues, and that he always attended in person, although invisible, to all the academic sessions. Encouraged by so many good things, I asked him for news of God and asked him if he had seen him recently. He answered me with a detachment tinged with some sadness, "We greet each other if we see each other, but like two old gentlemen who had not quite succeeded in extinguishing the memory of past quarrels in an innate courtesy. It is doubtful that His Highness has ever given so long an audience to a mere mortal, and I feared I was abusing it. Finally, when the tremulous dawn whitened the windows, that famous character, sung by so many poets and served by so many philosophers who, without knowing it, work for His glory, told me, "I want you to have a good memory of me, and I am going to show him that I, who is spoken of so badly, am sometimes a good devil, to use a vulgar locution. In compensation for the irremediable loss of his soul, I give him the chance he would have won if luck had declared in his favor, that is, the possibility of alleviating and overcoming, throughout his life, that rare condition of boredom, a source of all your illnesses and of all your miserable progress. He will never formulate a wish that I do not help him carry out, he will reign over all his vulgar fellow men, he will have a good supply of flattery and even adoration, silver, gold, diamonds, magic palaces will go out to look for him, and beg him to accept them, without there being any effort to keep them. He will change homeland and country as often as his fancy tells him to. He will get drunk on pleasures, without tiredness, in enchanting countries where it is always hot and where women smell as good as flowers, etc., etc." He added, getting up and saying goodbye with a friendly smile. If it had not been for fear of humiliating myself in front of such a large assembly, I would gladly have fallen at the feet of the generous gambler, to thank him for his unheard of munificence. But little by little, after I had left him, he began to return to my bosom the incurable mistrust. I no longer dared to believe in happiness so prodigious, and while I lay down, praying once more, for a remnant of imbecile habit, I repeated to myself half asleep, "My God, Lord my God, make the devil keep his word to me." Rope. To Edouard Manet. Illusions, a friend told me, are perhaps as innumerable as the relationships of men among themselves or of men with things. And when the illusion disappears, that is, when we see the being or the fact as it exists outside of us, we experience a strange complicated feeling, half sorrow at the disappearance of the phantom, half pleasant surprise at the novelty, at the reality of the fact. If there is an obvious, trivial phenomenon, always similar and of a nature in which it is impossible to be mistaken, it is maternal love. It is as difficult to suppose a mother without maternal love as a light without heat. Is it not, therefore, perfectly legitimate to attribute to maternal love all the actions and words of a mother regarding her child? Well, listen, however, to this brief story, in which I have allowed myself to be singularly deceived by the most natural illusion. My profession as a painter moves me to look carefully at the faces, the physiognomies that cross my path, and you already know the joy we get from such a faculty, which makes life more alive in our eyes and more significant than for other men. In the remote neighborhood where I live, which still has vast stretches of grass between the houses, I used to observe a child whose fiery and mischievous countenance, more than that of the others, seduced me from the first moment. More than once he served as a model for me, and I transformed him, now into a gypsy, now into an angel, now into a mythological love. I gave him to carry the vagabond's violin, the crown of thorns and the nails of the passion, and the torch of Eros. I ended up taking such a keen liking to the grace of that boy that one day I went to ask his parents, some poor people, to give him up to me, promising that I would dress him well and give him some money, and I would not impose more work on him than to clean the brushes and run a few errands. The child, as soon as he was washed, became a charm, and the life he led with me seemed like a paradise compared to what he would have had to endure in his father's slum. I will only have to add that the little doll surprised me a few times with singular crises of precocious sadness, and that it soon began to manifest an immoderate liking for sugar and liquors, so much so that one day when I was able to verify, despite my repeated warnings, a new theft of such a kind committed by him, I threatened to return him to his parents. Then I went out, and my affairs kept me away from home for quite some time. What would not be my horror and my astonishment when, returning to her, the first thing that caught my eye was my little doll, the mischievous companion of my life, hanging from a panel of this closet. The feet almost touched the ground, a chair, doubtless kicked over, had fallen near him, the head rested convulsively on the shoulder, the swollen face and the dislocated eyes with terrifying fixity gave me, at once, the illusion of life. Taking him down was not as easy a task as you might think. He was already upright, and I felt an inexplicable reluctance to let him fall abruptly to the ground. It was necessary to support him in weight with one arm, and with the hand of the other to cut the rope. But with that, not everything was done. The little monster had used a very fine string, which had penetrated deeply into the flesh, and it was now necessary to search for the string, with very fine scissors, between the edges of the swelling, to free the neck. I forgot to tell you that I asked for help before, but all the neighbors refused to help me, thus faithful to the customs of civilized man, who never once, I don't know why, deals with hanged men. At last a doctor came and declared that the child was dead for several hours. When, later, we had to undress him for the burial, his morbid rigidity was such that, desperate to bend his limbs, we had to tear and cut his clothes to remove them. To the commissioner, to whom, of course, I had to report the accident, he looked at me out of the corner of his eye and said, "The matter is not clear," moved, no doubt, by an inveterate desire and a professional habit of instilling fear, worth for what it is worth, the same to innocent as to guilty. One supreme step still had to be taken, and just thinking about it made me feel terrible anguish. The parents had to be notified. The feet refused to carry me. At last he had courage. But, to my astonishment, the mother remained impassive, without a tear flowing from her eyes. I attributed such strangeness to the very horror that I must have felt, and I remembered the well-known maxim, "The most terrible pains are silent pains." The father contented himself with saying, looking half stupefied and self-absorbed, "After all, it's better that way. It had to end badly." Meanwhile, the body was stretched out on a sofa, and, with the help of a maid, I was busy making the last preparations, when the mother entered my study. He wanted, as he indicated, to see the body of his son. In truth, I could not prevent him from becoming intoxicated by his misfortune, nor deny him that supreme and gloomy consolation. He immediately asked me to show him the cupboard from which the boy had hanged himself. "Oh, no, ma'am," I answered her, "I would hurt him." And as my eyes turned involuntarily towards the cupboard, I saw with disgust, mixed with horror and anger, that the nail had remained in the board, with a long piece of string still dangling. I rushed to tear off those last vestiges of misfortune, and when I was about to throw them out of the open window, the poor woman seized my arm and said to me in an irresistible voice, "Lord, leave it to me. I beg you. I beg you." Desperation, so I thought, had so maddened her that she fell tenderly in love with what had served as the instrument of her son's death. He wanted to keep it as a horrible and beloved relic. And he seized the nail and the string. Finally it's all over. There was nothing left for me but to get to work again, with even greater vigor than usual, to gradually reject that little corpse, which got into the folds of my brain, and whose ghost tired me with its big fixed eyes. But the next day I received a lot of letters, one from the tenants of the house, others from neighboring houses, one from the first floor, another from the second, another from the third, and so on, some in a semi-funny style, as if they were trying to disguise the sincerity of the request with an apparent joke, others of a shameless heaviness and without spelling, but all aimed at the same thing, that is, to obtain from me a piece of the fatal and beatific rope. Among the signatories there were, it is necessary to say it, more women than men, but not all, believe it, belonged to the lowest and vulgar class. I have kept the letters. Then suddenly there was a light in my brain, and I understood why the mother insisted so much on pulling the string from me, and with what traffic she intended to find comfort. Vocations. In a beautiful garden, where the rays of the autumn sun seemed to linger at ease, under an already greenish sky, with floating golden clouds like traveling continents, for beautiful children, for boys, doubtless tired of the game, talked among themselves. One read, "Yesterday they took me to the theater." In large and sad palaces, at the bottom of which you can see the sea and the sky, some men and women, serious and sad too, but more beautiful and much better dressed than those we usually see, speak with a voice that is a song. They threaten each other, beg, become anguished and often raise their hand to a dagger stuck in their belt. Oh, how beautiful it is! The women are much prettier and taller than those who come home to see us, and terrible as their big sunken eyes and flushed cheeks make them look, no one can help but be delighted to see them. They instill fear, you want to cry, and yet you enjoy yourself so much. And the most singular thing is that you want to be dressed like them, to do and say the same thing, to speak with the same voice. One of those 4 children, who had not listened to his companion's speech for a few seconds and was observing with astonishing fixity I don't know what part of the sky, suddenly said, "Look, look, far away. Do you see him? He is sitting on that lonely cloud, on that fire-colored cloud that walks slowly. He also seems to be watching us." "But who?" the others asked. "God," he answered with an accent of complete conviction. "Oh, it is already very far, soon you won't be able to see him anymore. He is undoubtedly traveling, visiting all countries. Look, it's going to pass behind that line of trees that is almost on the horizon, and now it's coming down behind the bell tower. Oh, you can't see it anymore." And the child remained for a long time turned on the same side, his eyes fixed on the line that separates earth from heaven, in which an ineffable expression of ecstasy and sorrow shone. "It will be silly, with that God that no one but him has seen." Then said the third, whose little person was marked by a singular vivacity and vitality, "I am going to tell you how something happened to me that has never happened to you, and that is of greater interest than your theater and your clouds. A few days ago, my parents took me with them to travel, and as in the inn where we stopped there were not enough beds for everyone, they decided that I should sleep in the same bed as my maid." He called his companions closer to him, and spoke in a lower voice. It is curious the effect that causes not to be lying alone and to be in a bed with the maid, in darkness. Since I didn't fall asleep, I amused myself, while she slept, running my hands over her arms, around her neck, and over her shoulders. Her arms and neck are much thicker than all the other women, and her skin is so soft, so smooth, it looks like writing paper or tissue paper. It gave me so much pleasure that I would have continued for a long time, if I had not been afraid, first, afraid of waking her up, and then afraid of I don't know what. I immediately put my head into her hair, which fell down her back, thick as a mane, and smelled as good, I assure you, as the flowers in the garden at this hour. Try, when you can, to do the same, and you'll see. The young author of such a prodigious story had, during the narration, his eyes wide open in a kind of stupor at what he still felt, and the rays of the setting sun, slipping through the reddish locks of his tangled hair, lit up around him. She like a sulphurous halo of passion. It was easy to guess that he was not to spend his life looking for divinity in the clouds, and that he would often find it elsewhere. Finally, the fourth said, "You know that I don't usually have fun at home, they never take me to the theater, my tutor is too stingy, God doesn't care about me or my boredom, and I don't have a pretty maid to put me to sleep. Many times I have thought that I would find pleasure in always walking forward, in a straight line, without knowing where, without worrying anyone, and in always seeing new countries. I am never well anywhere, and I always think that I would be better off somewhere else than where I am. Well, at the last fair in the neighboring town, I saw 3 men who live as I would like to live. You did not notice them. They were tall, almost black, and very haughty, although ragged, with traces of needing no one. Their big dark eyes turned bright as they played music so amazing that it makes you want to dance or cry or both at the same time. One would go crazy if he listened to it for a long time. One, dragging the bow on the violin, seemed to sing a sorrow, and another, jumping the little hammer on the strings of a short piano hung from a strap around his neck, seemed to mock his neighbor's lamentation, while the third gathered from time to time the cymbals with extraordinary violence. So pleased were they with themselves that they continued to play their savage music even after the crowd had dispersed. Finally, they collected their quarters, put their belongings on their backs, and left. I, knowing where they lived, followed them from afar to the edge of the forest, only there I came to understand that they did not live anywhere. Then one said, "Should we open the store?" "No, nothing like that," answered another, "the night is so beautiful." The third counted the proceeds, and said, "Those people don't feel the music, and their women dance like bears. Fortunately, within a month we will be in Austria, where we will find a kinder people. Perhaps it would be better if we went to Spain, because the season is already passing. Let's flee before the rains and we don't get our throats wet anymore," said one of the others. I remember everything, as you can see. Immediately each drank a cup of brandy and fell asleep, facing the stars. At first I wanted to ask them to take me with them and teach me to play their instruments, but I did not dare, no doubt because it is always very difficult to decide on anything, and also because I was afraid that they would catch me again before I had left France. The uninterested appearance of the other 3 companions led me to think that this boy was already misunderstood. She was looking at him carefully. He had in his eyes and on his forehead that I don't know how precociously fatal that tends to drive away sympathy, and that, I don't know why, excited what is in me to such an extent that the strange idea occurred to me for a moment. That I could have a brother that I myself did not know. The sun had set. The solemn night had already taken its place. The children separated, each one leaving, unknowingly, depending on the circumstances and chances, to ripen their destiny, to scandalize their neighbor and gravitate towards glory or dishonor. The thyrsus. To Franz Liszt. What is a thyrsus? According to the moral and poetic sense, it is a priestly emblem in the hands of the priests or priestesses who celebrate the divinity, whose interpreters and servers they are. But, physically, it is nothing more than a stick, a simple stick, hop hanger, vineyard rod, dry, hard and straight. Around that pole, in capricious meanders, stems and flowers play like crazy, the latter sinuous and elusive, the former leaning like bells or upside-down cups. An astonishing glory flows from such a complexity of lines and colors, tender or brilliant? Wouldn't it be said that the curve and the spiral make court to the straight line, dancing around it with mute adoration? Wouldn't it be said that all those delicate corollas, all those chalices, explosions of aromas and color, perform a mystical fandango around the hieratic hair? And who, however, is the imprudent mortal who would dare to decide if the flowers and the branches have been made for the stick, or if the stick is only the pretext to show the beauty of the branches and flowers? The thyrsus is the representation of your amazing duality, powerful and revered teacher, dear Bacchante of mysterious and passionate beauty. Never has the nymph, exasperated by the invincible Bacchus, shaken her thyrsus over the heads of her maddened companions with as much vigor and whim as you shake your temper over the hearts of your brothers. The stick is your straight, firm and unbreakable will. The flowers are the walk of your fantasy around your will. It is the female element that performs its prestigious pirouettes around the male. Straight line and arabesque line, intention and expression, rigidity of the will, sinuosity of the verb, unity of purpose, variety of means, all-powerful or indivisible amalgamation of genius, what analytic will have the detestable value of dividing and separating you? Dear Liszt, through the mists and beyond the rivers, above the cities where the pianos sing your glory and the printing press translates your knowledge, wherever you may be, in the splendors of the eternal city or in the mists of the dreaming countries comforted by Gambrinus, improvising songs of delight or ineffable pain or entrusting to paper your abstruse meditations, singer of eternal pleasure and anguish, philosopher, poet and artist, I greet you in immortality. Get drunk. You have to always be drunk. It all consists of that, it is the only question. In order not to feel the horrible burden of time, which breaks your shoulders and bends you to the ground, you have to get drunk without respite. But of what? Wine, poetry, or virtue, whatever you want. But get drunk. And if ever, on the steps of a palace, on the green grass of a moat, in the sad solitude of your room, you wake up, your drunkenness already diminished or dissipated, ask the wind, the wave, the star, to the bird, to the clock, to everything that flees, to everything that moans, to everything that rolls, to everything that sings, to everything that speaks, ask what time it is, and the wind, the wave, the star, the bird, the clock, will answer you, it is time to get drunk. In order not to be slaves and martyrs of time, get drunk without ceasing. Of wine, poetry, or virtue, whatever you want. Already. 100 times the radiant or saddened sun had already risen from the immense vat of the sea, whose edges can barely be seen. 100 times it had plunged again, sparkling or gloomy, into its immense evening bath. For many days we could contemplate the other side of the firmament and decipher the celestial alphabet of the antipodes. And every one of the passengers moaned and groaned. It would have been said that the depth of the earth exasperated his suffering. When, they said, will we finish sleeping a dream tossed by the waves, disturbed by a wind that snores louder than us? There were those who thought of their home, who missed their unfaithful wife and enough of their screaming offspring. So maddened were they all by the image of the absent earth, that, it seemed to me, they would have eaten grass with more enthusiasm than the animals. At last a shore was marked out, and we saw, as we approached, that it was a magnificent, dazzling land. It seemed that the music of life emanated from it in a vague murmur, and that on those coasts, rich in all kinds of greenery, the delicious aroma of flowers and fruits exhaled many leagues away. Soon they all became happy, each one abdicating his bad mood. All quarrels were forgotten, all reciprocal offenses were forgiven, agreed challenges were erased from memory, and grudges vanished like smoke. Only I was sad, inconceivably sad. Like the priest whose divinity was torn away, I could not, without disconsolate bitterness, detach myself from that sea so monstrously seductive, from that sea so infinitely varied in its terrifying simplicity, which it seems to contain within itself, and to represent in its games, in his demeanor, his anger and smiles, the moods, the agonies and the ecstasies of all the souls that have lived, live and will live. As I said goodbye to such an incomparable beauty, I felt dejected to death. That's why when each one of my companions said, finally, I could only give a shout, now. It was, then, the earth with its noise, its passions, its comforts, its festivals. It was a magnificent land, full of promises, which sent us a mysterious perfume of roses and musk, and from where the music of life reached us in a sweet murmur. The windows. He who looks through an open window from the outside never sees as many things as he who looks through a closed window. There is no deeper, more mysterious, more fruitful, darker, more dazzling object than a window illuminated by a candle. What can be seen in the sun is always less interesting than what happens behind glass. In that black or luminous hole life lives, life dreams, life suffers. Beyond the waves of the roofs, I see a woman, already mature and wrinkled, poor, always bent over something, never going out. With her face, with her dress, with her gesture, with almost nothing, I have reconstructed the story of that woman, or, better, her legend, and sometimes I tell it to myself crying. If he had been a poor old man, I would have rebuilt his with the same ease. And I go to bed, proud of having lived and suffered in beings different from me. Perhaps you will say to me, are you sure that such a legend is true? What? Does it matter what may be the reality placed outside of me if it helped me to live, to feel that I am and what I am? The desire to paint. Unhappy perhaps the man, but happy the artist torn by desire. Burning I am to paint the one who so rarely appeared to me to flee so. Haste, like a beautiful thing to be missed after the traveler carried away in the night. How long has it been since he disappeared? It is beautiful and more than beautiful, it is surprising. The black in her abounds, and what he inspires is nocturnal and deep. His eyes are like stars in which mystery vaguely sparkles, and his gaze illuminates like lightning. It is an explosion in the darkness. I would compare it to a black sun if a black star capable of shedding light and happiness could be conceived. But it makes one think more comfortably of the moon, which undoubtedly marked her with its fearsome influence, not in the white moon of idols, similar to a cold bride, but in the sinister and intoxicating moon, hanging from the bottom of a stormy night and run over by the rushing clouds, not in the peaceful and discreet moon, visitor to the sleep of pure men, but in the moon torn from heaven, defeated and rebellious, whom the Thessalian sorcerers harshly forced to dance on the terrified grass. On its narrow forehead dwells the tenacious will and the love of the prey. However, in the lower part of that disturbing face, where the mobile nostrils inhale the unknown and the impossible, the laughter of a large mouth, red and white and delicious, breaks out with inexpressible grace, which makes one dream in the air. Miracle of a superb blooming flower in a volcanic soil. There are women who inspire a desire to conquer them or to enjoy them, but this instills the desire to die slowly before his eyes. The benefits of the moon. The moon, which is caprice itself, appeared through the window while you were sleeping in the cradle, and she said to herself, I like that creature. And he descended softly through his cloud ladder and passed noiselessly through the crystals. Then she stretched out over you with the flexible tenderness of a mother, and deposited her colors on your face. Your pupils turned green and your cheeks extremely pale. Contemplating such a visitor, your eyes widened so strangely, your throat squeezed so tenderly, that it left you wanting to cry forever. Meanwhile, in the expansion of her joy, the moon filled the entire room like a phosphoric atmosphere, like a luminous poison, and all that living light was thinking and saying, "Eternally you will feel the influence of my kiss. You will be beautiful in my way. You will want what I want and what you want me, the water, the clouds, the silence and the night, to the immense and green sea, to the water shapeless and multiform, to the place where you are not, to the lover you don't know, to the monstrous flowers, to the perfumes that make you delirious, to the cats that faint on the pianos and moan like women, with a hoarse and soft voice. And you will be loved by my lovers, courted by my courtiers. You will be queen of the green-eyed men whose throats I squeezed in my nocturnal caresses, of those who love the sea, the immense, tumultuous and green sea, to the shapeless and multiform water, to the place where they are not, to the woman they do not know, to the sinister flowers that seem to be censors of an unknown religion, to the perfumes that disturb the will and to the wild and voluptuous animals that are emblems of their craziness. And for this, spoiled, cursed and beloved child, I am now stretched out at your feet, seeking in your whole person the reflection of the terrible divinity, of the fateful godmother, of the poisonous nurse of all lunatics. Which one is the real one? I met a certain Benedicta, who filled the atmosphere with ideals and whose eyes poured out desire for greatness, beauty, glory, for everything that leads one to believe in immortality. But the miraculous girl was too beautiful to live long. Thus, she died a few days after I had known her, and I buried her myself, one day when spring waved its censer to the cemeteries. I was the one who buried her, well guarded in a perfumed wooden coffin, incorruptible like the chests of India. And as my eyes remained fixed on the place where I sunk my treasure, I suddenly saw a little creature that resembled the deceased in a singular way, and that, trampling the fresh earth with hysterical and strange violence, said, laughing, "The real Benedicta is me. It's me, brave rascal. And as punishment for your madness and your blindness, you will love me as I am." But I, furious, answered, "No, no, no." And to further accentuate my refusal, I struck the ground so hard with my foot that my leg sank knee-deep into the recent grave, and, like a wolf caught in a trap, I remain imprisoned, perhaps forever, in the pit of my ideal. A race-horse. She is very ugly. And yet it is delicious. Time and love have marked her with their claws and have cruelly taught her how each minute and each kiss takes away from youth and freshness. It is truly ugly. It's an ant, a spider, even a skeleton if you want, but it's also a concoction, magistery, spell. In short, it is exquisite. Time could not break the sparkling harmony of its walk and the indestructible elegance of its frame. Love could not alter the softness of its childish breath, and time torn nothing from its abundant mane that exhales in tawny perfumes all the devilish vitality of the French South, Nîmes, Aix, Arles, Avignon, Narbonne, Toulouse, blessed cities of the sunshine, in love and lovely. In vain time and love bit her with good teeth, in no way diminished the vague but eternal charm of her maiden chest. Worn out perhaps, but not tired, and always heroic, it makes one think of those fine breed horses that the eyes of the true aficionado distinguish even if they are harnessed to a hired carriage or a slow wagon. And it is also so sweet and fervent. He wants as he wants in autumn. It would seem that the proximity of winter kindles a new fire in her heart, and there was never anything tiresome in her servile tenderness. Mirror. A scary man walks in and looks at himself in the mirror. Why do you look in the mirror if you don't have to see yourself in it except with displeasure? The frightful man answers me, My lord, according to the immortal principles of 89, all men are equal in rights, so, then, I have the right to look at myself, like it or not, it's only up to my conscience. In the name of good sense, I was right, no doubt, but from the point of view of the law, he was not wrong. Port. A port is a charming abode for a soul weary of life's struggles. The breadth of the sky, the moving architecture of the clouds, the changing color of the sea, the twinkling of the headlights, are wonderfully suitable prism to distract the eyes without ever tiring them. The slender shapes of the ships with their complicated rigging, to which the swell gives harmonious oscillations, serve to maintain the taste for rhythm and beauty in the soul. And also, above all, there is a kind of mysterious and aristocratic pleasure, for those who no longer have curiosity or ambition, in contemplating, stretched out on the roof or leaning their elbows on the quay, all the movements of those who leave and of those who return, of those who still have the strength to love, the desire to travel or to get rich. Portraits of darlings. In a private men's room, that is to say, in the smoking room belonging to an elegant joint, for men smoked and drank. They weren't exactly young or old, pretty or ugly, but, old or young, they bore that not inconsiderable distinction of the veterans of jouissance, that indescribable I don't know what, that cold and mocking sadness that clearly says, we have lived intensely and we searched for something that we could love and esteem. One of them led the conversation to the subject of women. It would have been more philosophical not to say anything about it, but there are witty people who, after having drunk, do not despise trivial conversation. They hear the speaker as one would listen to dance music. All men, said that one, have passed through the age of cherubim. It is the time when, in the absence of dryads, an embrace without repugnance is given to the trunk of an oak. It is the first step of love. On the second step you begin to choose. Being in a position to deliberate is already decadence. Then beauty is decidedly sought. Gentlemen, I glory in having reached the climacteric period of the third step for a long time, in which beauty itself is not enough if it is not seasoned with perfumes, dressings, etc. I will even confess that sometimes, like unknown happiness, I aspire to a certain fourth step that has to indicate absolute calm. But in all my life, except at the age of cherubim, I have been more sensitive than any other to the enervating foolishness, to the irritating mediocrity of women. What I like above all in animals is candor. Judge, then, how much my last darling would make me spend. She was bastard of a prince. Beautiful, it doesn't have to be said. If not, would I have approached her? But he marred that great quality with an unseemly and misshapen ambition. It was a woman who liked to play the man. You are not a man. Ah, if I were a man. Between the two of us, I'm the man. Such were the unbearable refrains that came out of that mouth, when I would have wanted it to just blow up songs. About a book, a poem, an opera, when my admiration escaped me, do you think that's very good? He said to the point. What do you know about what it is to be well? And began to argue. One day he dedicated himself to chemistry, in such a way that between my mouth and his I found from now on a glass mask. And, with all this, very prudish. If he ever ran over her with an excessively loving gesture, she would go into convulsions like a sensitive rape. And how did that end? Said one of the others. I didn't believe him so patiently. God, he continued, brought the remedy for the disease. One day I found that Minerva, hungry for ideal vigor, chatting with a servant, and in a situation that forced me to withdraw discreetly so they wouldn't blush. At night I fired them both, paying them the amount of their salary. "Well," said the switch then, "I can only complain about myself. Happiness came to live in my house and I didn't recognize it. Fate, in recent times, had granted me the enjoyment of a woman who was the softest, the most submissive, the most self-sacrificing creature. Always ready. And without enthusiasm. I want to, since he likes it," usually was his answer. If you were to beat that wall or this sofa, you would draw more sighs from them than the transports of the most senseless love drew from the bosom of my beloved. After a year of living together, he confessed to me that he had never enjoyed himself. That unequal duel disgusted me, and the incomparable girl married. Later he gave me the idea of seeing her, and showing me 6 beautiful children. He said, "Well, dear friend, the wife is still as virgin as her mistress was. Nothing had changed in that person. Sometimes I miss her, I should have married her." The others laughed, and a third said in turn, "I, gentlemen, have known pleasures that perhaps you have disdained. I want to talk about the comic in love, about a comic character that does not exclude admiration. I admired my last mistress more, it seems to me, than you could have hated or loved yours. And everyone admired her the same as I did. When we entered a restaurant, after a few minutes everyone forgot to eat to watch her. Even the waiters and the lady behind the counter felt that contagious ecstasy that led them to neglect their obligations. In short, that I lived for some time hand in hand with a living phenomenon. He ate, chewed, ground, devoured, swallowed, but with the lightest and most carefree demeanor in the world. That's how he kept me in ecstasy for a long time." She had a sweet, dreamy, English, and fictional way of saying, "I'm hungry," and she repeated it day and night, showing her most beautiful teeth, which would have touched and delighted you at the same time. I could have made a fortune showing it off at the fairs as a polyphagous monster. I fed her well, and yet she abandoned me. By a food contractor, no doubt. Something like that, a kind of quartermaster employee who, with a certain wand of virtues that he possessed, perhaps gave the poor creature the ration of several soldiers. So I supposed at least. "I," said the fourth, "have suffered atrocious sufferings for the opposite of what is usually thrown in the face of the selfish female. Ill-advised you seem to me, lucky mortals, when you complain about the imperfections of your mistresses." This was said to himself, in a serious enough tone, by a man with a calm and composed appearance, with an almost clerical physiognomy, unhappily illuminated by pale grey eyes, eyes whose look says, "I want to," or, "It is necessary," or, I forgive." If you, G, with how nervous you are, and you, K, and J, with your laziness and lightness, had gotten close to a certain woman that I know, or you would have run away or you would have died. I, as you can see, have survived. Imagine a person incapable of making an error of feeling or calculation. Imagine a desolating serenity of character, a self-denial without comedy and without emphasis, a sweetness without weakness, an energy without violence. The story of my love is like an endless journey across a pure and smooth surface, like a mirror, dizzyingly monotonous, reflecting all my feelings and my gestures with the ironic accuracy of my own conscience, so that I could not allow myself a gesture or feeling that was unreasonable without immediately seeing the mute rebuke of my inseparable spectre. Love appeared to me as a guardianship. How many foolish things did you prevent me from doing, so I'm sorry I didn't commit them. How many debts paid against my will! It deprived me of all the benefits that I could have derived from my own folly. With cold and insurmountable law he crossed all my whims. To make matters worse, no gratitude was required once the danger had passed. How many times did I have to restrain myself from grabbing her by the neck, shouting at her, "But be imperfect, miserable, so that I can love you without discomfort and without anger." For some years I admired her, my heart full of loathing. But, in the end, the dead person is not me. "Oh," said the others. "So has she died?" Yes, that could not continue. Love had turned into an overwhelming nightmare. Win or die, as the policy says, such an alternative was imposed on me by fate. One evening, in a forest, on the edge of a pond, after a melancholy walk in which her eyes reflected the sweetness of heaven, and my heart was tense as hell. "What? I eat? What are you going to tell us?" It was inevitable. I have too much feeling for fairness to hit, insult or fire an irreproachable server. But it was necessary to balance that feeling with the horror that being inspired in me. Get rid of such a being without disrespect. What was I going to do with her, if she was perfect? The three companions looked at each other with vague and slightly stupefied eyes, as if they were pretending not to understand and implicitly confessing that, for their part, they did not feel capable of such rigorous action, even if it was, moreover, perfectly explained. They ordered other bottles to be brought immediately to kill time, which has such a hard life, and speed up life, which goes so slowly. The gallant shooter. When the carriage was passing through the woods, he ordered it to stop in the vicinity of a shot, saying that it would be nice for him to shoot some bullets to kill time. Killing that monster isn't everyone's most ordinary and legitimate occupation. And he gallantly offered his hand to his dear, delicious and execrable woman, to that mysterious woman to whom he owed so much pleasure, so much pain, and perhaps also a large part of his genius. Some bullets went far from the target, one even nailed itself to the ceiling, and as the charming creature began to laugh madly, mocking her husband's clumsiness, he turned abruptly towards her, and said, "Look at that doll, over there, to the right, the one with the nose rolled up, with such a haughty face. Well, my angel, I guess it's you." And, closing his eyes, he fired. The doll was decapitated dry. Then, leaning towards his mistress, his delicious, his execrable wife, his inevitable and ruthless muse, and respectfully kissing her hand, he added, "Oh my angel, how I thank you for my skill." Soup and clouds. My beloved Loco invited me to eat, and through the open window of the dining room I was contemplating the shifting architectures that God makes with the vapors, the marvelous constructions of the impalpable. And he said to me, through my contemplation, "All those phantasmagories are almost as beautiful as the eyes of my beautiful love, the monstrous madwoman with green eyes." Suddenly, I felt a violent punch in the back and I heard a hoarse and charming voice, a hysterical voice and as if hoarse from brandy, the voice of my beloved girl, who said, "When did you finish eating your soup, or, merchant of clouds?" The shot and the cemetery. Within sight of the cemetery, drinks. A singular sample, our passerby said to himself, but a good one to excite thirst. Surely the owner of this tavern knows how to appreciate Horace and the poetic disciples of Epicurus. Perhaps he even knows the profound refinement of the ancient Egyptians, for whom there was no good feast without a skeleton or without any emblem of the brevity of life. And he went in, drank a glass of beer in front of the graves and slowly smoked a cigar. Then he had the idea of going down to that cemetery with grass so tall, so inviting, and where such a rich sun reigned. Indeed, the light and the heat were raging, and it would have been said that the drunken sun was wallowing full length on a carpet of magnificent flowers, fed by destruction. An immense noise of life filled the air, the life of the infinitely small, interrupted at regular intervals by the crackle of shots from a nearby shot, which exploded like the explosion of champagne corks in the hum of a muted symphony. Then, under the sun that was warming his brains and in the atmosphere of the burning perfumes of death, he heard a voice whispering in the grave where he had sat, and the voice said, "Damn your targets and your guns, turbulent alive, how little do you care for the deceased and their divine repose. Cursed your ambitions, cursed your calculations, impatient mortals, who come to study the art of killing near the sanctuary of death. If you only knew how easy winning is the prize, how easy is the goal to touch, and how everything is nothing, except death, you would not tire yourselves so much, laborious living, and less often would you come to disturb the sleep of those who have hit the mark for so long, in the only true target of the detestable life. Halo loss. But how? Are you here, dear? You in a place of perdition. You, the drinker of quintessences. You ragweed eater. In truth, I have to be surprised. My dear, you know my terror of horses and carriages. A moment ago, as I was crossing the boulevard, hastily, striding through the mud, through that shifting chaos in which death comes galloping everywhere at once, the halo, in a sudden movement, slipped from me. From the head to the mud of the macadam. I haven't had the courage to pick it up. I thought it less unpleasant to lose my insignia than to break my bones. And besides, I have told myself, there is no evil that does not come for good. Now I can walk around incognito, perform low deeds, and give myself over to the rogue like mere mortals. And here you have me, similar to you in everything, as you are seeing me. At least you should put an ad for the halo, or claim it at the police station. No, my faith. I feel good here. You have only recognized me. On the other hand, dignity bores me. Then I'm thinking with joy that some bad poet will pick it up and impudently put it on his head. What a joy to make a man happy. And, above all, happy to make me laugh. Think of X or Z. Oh. Yeah, that's going to be funny. Miss Scalpel. When I reached the end of the suburb, at the flashes of the gas I felt an arm slide gently under mine, and I heard a voice whispering in my ear. You are a doctor, right? Look, she was a tall, stocky, wide-eyed girl with a light shave, her hair fluttered in the wind, like the ribbons on her cap. No, I'm not a doctor. Let me through. Yes. You are a doctor. I know it. Come to my house. You will be happy with me. Come on. Yes, yes, I'll go see her, but later, after the doctor. What a devil. Oh, oh. He launched, without letting go of my arm, with a laugh. You are a joking doctor, I have known several like that. Come on. I passionately like the mystery, because I always hope to clarify it. So, then, I let myself be carried away by the companion, or rather, by that unexpected enigma. I omit the description of the hovel, you could find it in several well-known French poets. Only, a detail that Regnier did not notice, 2 or 3 portraits of famous doctors were hanging on the wall. What pampering I received! Good fire, mulled wine, cigars, and when she offered me such good things, while she also lit a cigar, the funny creature said to me. "Imagine you are at home, my friend, get comfortable. This is how he will remember the hospital and the good times of youth. Come on. Where did you get these gray hairs? You weren't like that, not long ago, when I was an intern at L. I remember that you assisted me in serious operations. That was a man fond of cutting and scraping. You were giving him the instruments, the lint and the sponges. And with what pride he would say, once the operation was done, looking at his pocket watch, 5 minutes, gentlemen. Oh. I go everywhere. I already know all those gentlemen." A few moments later, calling me the first name, he returned to his refrain and told me. "You are a doctor. Right, my kitty." That unintelligible filler made me jump to my feet. "Not." I yelled furiously. "Well, you'll be a surgeon. Nerd. Unless it's to cut off your head, wait," he continued. "You will see." And from a cupboard he took out a bundle of papers, which was nothing more than a collection of portraits of the illustrious doctors of that time, lithographed by Morin, which I have seen exhibited on the Quai Voltaire for many years. "Look. Do you recognize this one?" "Yes, is X. Also, it has the name below it, but I know him personally." I already said. "Look. Here is Z, the one who used to say in class, talking about X, that monster, whose face is black with his soul. And all because I was not of his opinion on a certain matter. What laughter raised all this at school at that time. You remember. Look, this is K, the one who denounced the insurgents he was treating in the hospital to the government. They were times of riots. How can such a handsome man have so little heart? Here now is W, a famous English physician. I caught him when he came to Paris. It looks like a lady, right? And, as I touched a package tied with a twine that was on the nightstand, "Wait a bit," he said, "these are the internal ones, and those of the package, the external ones." He fanned out a bunch of photographs depicting faces. "Younger. When we meet again, you will give me your portrait, won't you, dear?" "But," I said, following my fixed idea, "why do you think I'm a doctor? You are so nice and so good with women." Singular logic. I said to myself. Oh, I don't usually fool myself. I have met many. I like these gentlemen so much that, even without being sick, I go to see them many times just to see them. There are those who coldly tell me, "You don't have any disease." But there are others who understand me, because I make gestures to them. And when they don't understand you, man, as I have bothered you uselessly, I leave 10 francs on the fireplace. They are so good and so affectionate, those men. I have discovered in pity an inner boy, pretty as an angel, and so well educated. What works the poor boy? His companions have told me that he does not have a room, because his parents are poor and cannot send him anything. That has given me confidence. After all, pretty enough I am already, though not too young. I told him, come and see me often. And don't worry about me, I don't need money. But you will understand that I have given him to understand with great care. I didn't tell him like that, bluntly, I was so afraid of humiliating the poor thing. Well, do you think that I have a silly whim and that I dare not tell him? I would like you to come to see me with the case and the apron, even a little stained with blood. He said it in a very candid tone, as a sensitive man would say to a comedian he was in love with, "I want to see her dressed in the costume she pulls off in that famous role she has created." Continuing in my obstinacy, I continued. "Can you remember the time and the occasion in which that special passion was born in you?" I hardly got him to understand me, but I did eventually. Only then he answered me with a very sad air, and, if I remember correctly, even turning his eyes away from me. "I do not know, I do not remember." What rarities does one not find in a big city, when one knows how to walk through it and look? In life, innocent monsters swarm. Lord my God! You, the Creator, you, the Master, you, who made the law and freedom, you, the Sovereign who lets you do, you, the Judge who forgives, you, who are full of reasons and causes, and who have perhaps put in my spirit the taste for horror to turn my heart, like health on the point of a blade. Lord, have mercy on the crazy men and women. O Creator! Can monsters exist in the eyes of the one who only knows why they exist, how they were made, and how they could not have been made? Anywhere out of the world. Life is a hospital in which each patient is possessed by the desire to change beds. This one would like to suffer by the stove, and that one believes that he would be cured in front of the window. It seems to me that it would be fine where I am not, and that idea of moving is one that I endlessly discuss with my soul. Tell me, my soul, poor cold soul, what would you like to live in Lisbon? It will be hot there, and you will stretch out like a lizard. The city is at the water's edge. They say that it is built of marble, and that the people hate vegetables so much that they uproot all the trees. That is a landscape for your taste, a landscape made with light and mineral, and the liquid to reflect it. My soul does not answer. Since you like rest so much, with the spectacle of movement, do you want to come to Holland, a beatific land? Perhaps you would have fun in that country whose image you have admired so many times in museums. What would you think of Rotterdam, you who like forests of masts and ships moored at the foot of houses? My soul is still mute. Would Batavia perhaps smile at you? We would find in it, of course, the spirit of Europe linked with tropical beauty. Not a word. Has my soul died? So you have reached such a point of numbness that you only recreate yourself in your evil? If so, let us flee to countries that are analogous to death. I already have what suits us, poor soul. We will make the trunks for Borneo. Let's go even further, to the extreme end of the Baltic, further still from life, if possible, let us settle in the pole. There the sun touches the earth only obliquely, and the slow alternations of light and dark suppress variation and increase monotony, which is half of nothing. There we can take long baths of darkness, while, to amuse us, the northern lights send us from time to time their rosy beams, like reflections of a firework from hell. Finally, my soul explodes, and wisely shouts at me, anywhere. Anywhere. As long as it's out of this world. Let's kill the poor. For 15 days I secluded myself in my room, surrounded by the books that were in fashion at the time. It will be 16 or 17 years ago. I mean the books that deal with the art of making people happy, good, and rich in 24 hours. He had, then, digested, that is, swallowed, all the lucubrations of those contractors of public happiness who advise all the poor to become slaves and who manage to persuade them that they are all dethroned kings. It will not come as a surprise that I was then in a state of mind close to vertigo or stupidity. It had only seemed to me that I felt, confined to the depths of my intellect, the dark germ of an idea superior to all the formulas of a good woman, whose dictionary I had gone through not long ago. But it was only the idea of an idea, something infinitely vague. And I left with a great thirst. Because the passionate taste for bad reading engenders a need in proportion for fresh air and refreshments. About to enter the tavern, a beggar handed me my hat, with one of those unforgettable looks that would topple thrones if the spirit moved matter and if the eyes of a magnetizer made the grapes ripe. At the same time I heard a voice whispering in my ear, a voice that I perfectly recognized. It was that of a good angel or a good demon, who accompanies me everywhere. Since Socrates had his good demon, why shouldn't I have my good angel, and why not, like Socrates, have the honor of receiving my certificate of madness, signed by the subtle Lelit and the clever Baudelaire? This difference exists between the demon of Socrates and mine, that Socrates's only manifested itself to defend, warn or prevent, and mine deigns to advise, suggest, persuade. Poor Socrates had nothing but a prohibitive demon, mine is big affirmer, mine is action demon, combat demon. His voice, then, whispered to me this: only the one who shows it is equal to another, and only the one who knows how to conquer it is worthy of freedom. I immediately threw myself on my beggar. With a single punch I swelled one eye, which in a second became the size of a ball. I broke a nail by breaking two of his teeth, and since I didn't feel strong enough, because I am delicate from birth and have practiced little boxing, in order to kill the old man quickly, I took him by the lapel of his dress with one hand. I grabbed him by the scruff of the neck with the other and began to shake his head vigorously against the wall. I must confess that before I had inspected the surroundings at a glance, to verify that in that deserted suburb I found myself, for quite a long time, out of the reach of any police officer. Immediately, with a kick in the back, forceful enough to break his shoulder blades, I smothered the feeble 60-year-old. I seized a thick branch that had fallen and hit him with the obstinate energy of cooks who want to tenderize a steak. Suddenly, oh miracle, oh delight of the philosopher who proves the excellence of his theory, I saw that the old framework of bones turned, rose with energy, that I would never have suspected in such a decomposed machine, and with a hateful look that seemed to me a good omen, the decrepit scoundrel jumped on me, swelled both my eyes, broke 4 of my teeth, and with the same branch he shook an abundance of firewood at me. With my strong medication I had restored his pride and life. I made signs to him then, to let him understand that I was ending the discussion, and getting up as satisfied as a sophist from the portico, I said to him, "My lord, you are the same as me. Grant me the honor of sharing my bag with me, and remember, if you are a true philanthropist, that to all your colleagues, when they ask you for alms, you have to apply the theory that I have had the pain of rehearsing on your back." He swore to me that he understood my theory and would be obedient to my advice. Good dogs. To M. Joseph Stevens. I was never ashamed, not even in front of the young writers of my century, of admiring Buffon, but today I will not call to my aid the soul of that painter of pompous nature. Not. I would go to Sterne more willingly to tell him, "Come down from heaven, or come up to me from the Champs-Élysées, to inspire me in favor of good dogs, of poor dogs, a song worthy of you, sentimental, joker, incomparable joker. Return astride the famous donkey that always accompanies you in the memory of posterity, and, above all, that the donkey should not forget to bring, delicately suspended between its lips, the immortal macaroni. Back the academic muse. I want nothing with such a prudish old woman. I invoke the family muse, the citizen, the living one, to help me sing to the good dogs, the poor dogs, the dirty dogs, whom everyone throws out as pestilent and lousy, except the poor with whom they have associated and the poet who looks at them with brotherly eyes. Too bad for the handsome dog, the fat four-legged Dane, King Charles, bulldog, or lapdog, so enchanted with himself that he indiscreetly pounces on the visitor's legs or knees, as if sure to please, turbulent as a child, foolish as a Loretta, sometimes surly and insolent as a servant. Alas, especially for those four-legged snakes, trembling and idle, called greyhounds, which do not even harbor enough sense of smell in their pointed snout to keep track of a friend, nor in their flat heads intelligence enough to play with dominoes. To the pound all those boring parasites. Go back to the fluffy silky kennel. I sing of the dirty dog, the poor dog, the homeless dog, the running dog, the mountebank dog, the dog whose instinct, like that of the poor, the gypsy and the actor, is marvelously goaded by necessity, mother so good, true patroness of intelligence. I sing to the calamitous dogs, whether they are the ones that wander, lonely, through the winding ravines of the immense cities, or those that said to the abandoned man with blinking and ingenious eyes, "Take me with you, and with our two miseries we will do perhaps a kind of happiness." Where do the dogs go? Said, years ago, Nestor Roqueplan in an immortal melodrama that he has undoubtedly forgotten, and of which it may be that only Saint Beuve and I still remember today. Where do the dogs go, you ask, careless men? They go to their chores. Business appointments, love appointments. Through the mist, through the snow, through the mud, under the biting heat wave, under the dripping rain, they come, go, trot, pass under cars, excited by fleas, passion, necessity or duty. Like us, they got up early in the morning and seek their lives or run to his chores. There are those who sleep in a ruin in a suburb, and come, one day or another, at a fixed hour, to claim the scoop at the entrance to a kitchen in the Palais Royal, others who come in droves, from more than 5 leagues, to share the food that he prepared for them. The charity of certain sexagenarian maidens, who give their empty hearts to animals, because men no longer want them. Others who, like wild blacks, maddened with love, leave their homes on certain days to come to the city to run for an hour around a pretty bitch, somewhat negligent of her headdress, but arrogant and grateful. And they are all very punctual, without notebooks, notes or portfolios. Do you know, Belgium, the lazy one, and have you admired, like me, those vigorous dogs harnessed to the wheelbarrow of the butchers, the milkmaid, the baker, and who demonstrate with their triumphant barks the proud pleasure they feel in competing with horses? Look now at 2 who belong to a still more civilized order. Allow me to introduce you to the room of the absent mountebank. A bed, of painted wood, without curtains, dragging blankets, stained by bedbugs, 2 straw chairs, an iron stove, 1 or 2 musical instruments, out of order. What sad furniture! But look, I beg you, at those 2 intelligent characters, dressed in costumes that are both shabby and sumptuous, with troubadour or military hats, who watch with the attention of sorcerers the nameless work set to cook in the burning stove, with a long spoon in the middle, which rises up, planted like one of those masts announcing a finished building. Is it not fair that such zealous comedians should not set out without putting the ballast of a strong and solid soup in their stomachs? And won't you forgive a little sensuality to those poor things, who have to face all day the indifference of the public and the injustices of a director, who takes the biggest part and eats more soup than 4 comedians? How many times have I contemplated, smiling and moved, all those 4-legged philosophers, complacent, submissive or self-sacrificing slaves, who the Dictionary of the Republic could equally describe as officious, if the Republic, too busy with the happiness of men, had time to respect the honor of dogs. And how many times have I thought that there might be somewhere, who knows, after all, To reward so much encouragement, so much patience and work, a special paradise for good dogs, for poor dogs, for dogs dirty and desolate. Swedenborg claims that there is one for the Turks and one for the Dutch. The shepherds of Virgil and Theocritus expected, as a reward for their alternative songs, a good cheese, a flute of the best craftsman, or a goat with swollen tits. The poet who has sung to the poor dogs was rewarded with a beautiful vest, all of one color, rich and withered at the same time, which makes one think of the autumn suns, the beauty of mature women and the summers of St. Martin. None of those present in the tavern on Calle de Villahermosa will forget the petulance with which the painter stripped off his vest in favor of the poet. He also understood that it was good and honest to sing to the poor dogs. Perhaps a magnificent Italian tyrant of the good century offered the divine Aretino and a dagger adorned with precious stones, and a court mantle, in exchange for a precious sonnet or a curious satirical poem. And every time the poet puts on the painter's vest, he is forced to think about the good dogs, the philosophical dogs, the summers of St. Martin and the beauty of very mature women. Epilogue. I have climbed the mountain, my heart satisfied. In its breadth, from there, the city can be seen, a purgatory, a hell, a brothel, a hospital, a prison. Blooms like a flower their all enormity. You already know, O Satan, patron of my afflicted soul, that I did not go up to shed tears of vanity. As the old rake searches for the old darling, I searched for the enormous whore who intoxicates me like wine. That with its infernal charm rejuvenates my life. Already between the sheets you sleep from your morning bed, of heaviness, of cold, of shadow, or already you adorn yourself with the evening veils embroidered with fine gold. I love you, infamous capital. You, O courtesans. And you, O bandits, sometimes offer pleasures that the vulgar fool of profane people never understands.